Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into the stony belly of a medieval fortress, where you find yourself dragging your tired boots across uneven flagstones that have known centuries of footsteps. The torches along the walls flicker, and though they burn brightly, the cold seems to press through the cracks of mortar and between the heavy stones as if light and warmth never agreed to travel together. You pull your cloak tighter, the air sharp enough to sting your nose and cloud your breath. It's bedtime here, in a castle that has more drafts than doors, and you're about to discover just how knights, those armoured champions who spent their days charging across muddy fields, actually managed to rest when winter sank its claws into the night. You probably won't survive this, not with your modern central heating expectations. Still, you're going to try. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what's the local time as you drift off tonight? Now, dim the lights. The stone chamber around you smells faintly of soot, dampness, and a trace of old hay dragged in on someone's boots. No matter how grand the fortress looks from outside towers thrusting into the night sky, banners stiff in the wind, the interior feels less like luxury and more like a refrigerator made of rock. The truth is, these walls were built for defense, not for comfort. The very thickness that kept arrows out also locked in the chill, turning rooms into echo chambers for whistling drafts. You sit on the edge of a rough wooden bed, feeling that cold climb through the soles of your feet. A mainstream historical fact here. Castles in northern Europe could see winter nights dip below freezing inside the very rooms where nobles slept. Archaeological studies of drafty great halls show just how little insulation existed. Those thick walls didn't trap heat. They simply stored the cold like a vault. It's no wonder records mention constant fires and layers of clothing, even indoors. And yet, despite such conditions, people still considered castles symbols of wealth. Strange, isn't it, that privilege sometimes meant you froze in grandeur rather than sweating in a cottage near a warm hearth. You shift uneasily on the straw mattress beneath you, listening to the faint drip of water somewhere down the corridor. It's too easy to imagine that drop freezing into a small icicle before morning. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers noted that lords would keep barrels of wine near their beds, not for drinking alone, but to stop the liquid from freezing in storerooms. Imagine tucking into bed knowing that if your wine remained liquid overnight, you had successfully resisted the cold. If it froze, well, time to rethink your insulation strategy. The soundscape of your room isn't silence, it's restless. The wind sneaks through the arrow slits, moaning softly like a forgotten choir rehearsing out of tune. The rushes scattered on the floor crunch as you shift your boots. Somewhere, a rat rustles. Even the smallest creatures seek warmth in these walls. Your cloak scratches against your chin as you tuck it higher, shoulders hunched. A knight without armor but still braced for battle this time, against the cold itself. And yet, for all the discomfort, there's a strange peace. You're alive, with a roof overhead, safe from the wolves howling beyond the walls. The fire in the great hall still glows faintly, though here its heat doesn't reach. A servant's footsteps echo far away. This is where the nightly routine begins. A battle of wool, fur, and faith against a climate that shows no mercy. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly grew accustomed to the cold, or whether they suffered constantly and simply endured it. Some say the human body adapted, hardened by daily exposure, making icy rooms tolerable. Others insist letters, complaints, and court documents reveal constant grumbling about drafts, frost, and sleepless nights. Perhaps, like you tonight, they shivered endlessly and prayed for the quick return of dawn. You lie back slowly, letting your head sink onto a lumpy pillow. The straw inside crunches softly, not the luxury of feathers, but serviceable enough. You can almost feel the condensation of your own breath settling against the fabric, moistening it, making it colder still. If you close your eyes, you can sense how nights toughened by days of combat practice, patrols, or long marches still struggled here. They might face swords bravely, but here, in their chambers, the enemy was frost, and it crept in quietly, unseen, victorious more often than not. The ceiling beams groan in the wind, and you imagine snow piling on the roof, pressing downward with its muffled silence. The night is long, stretching like an unkind guest who refuses to leave. And you, wrapped in your cloak and pressed against that straw mattress, must accept that comfort will never come fully. Sleep will arrive, yes, but only after you've stopped noticing how your toes ache or how your breath lingers in visible clouds. This is your first night in the castle walls, and already you realize, surviving until dawn is no small feat. You're still lying there in the stone chamber, your cloak wrapped tightly around your shoulders, when you realize that what keeps you alive through such bitter nights isn't just the fire or the fur on the bed, but the sheer number of layers pressed between your body and the air. Linen, wool, more linen, another piece of wool. It's a game of stacking barriers against the cold until you feel more like a wrapped parcel than a person. Without those layers, you'd be stiff as frozen meat by morning. The first layer clings closest to your skin, usually a simple linen shift, smooth against your body, meant to be washed more often than outer clothes. That fabric is surprisingly practical. It wicks away sweat, keeping the rest of your garments dry. Over that comes wool, coarse and scratchy by modern standards, but precious in its ability to trap heat. You add a second tunic, perhaps a surcoat, then hose for your legs, and thick socks if fortune favors you. Some knights even slept with their boots nearby, though loosening them to avoid cutting off circulation was wise. Imagine trying to dream while your toes turn to icicles. A mainstream historical fact helps here. Medieval wool was not like the soft merino sweaters you know today. It was heavier, denser, and often blended with oils left over from the sheep's fleece. That natural lanolin offered a degree of water resistance, but also produced a faint odor, something between earthy and oily that lingered in every garment. If you're drifting in this chamber, you'll smell it too, mixing with smoke and damp stone. To medieval noses, that scent wasn't unpleasant. It simply meant survival. Now, here's a quirky tidbit to make you smile before you tuck your chin deeper into your blanket. Wealthier knights sometimes had nightcaps, not just hats, but full hoods with long tails that could be wrapped under the chin like a scarf. One account describes a nobleman so fond of his cap that he refused to remove it even during late-night meetings, leaving others to wonder whether his loyalty was to God, his lord, or the wool covering his ears. Imagine rolling over in bed, your hood tied tightly, looking more like a bundled onion than a warrior. The layers didn't end with clothing. Blankets, woven from wool, could be stacked 3 or 4 high. If the household had access to finer cloth, there might be a linen sheet between woolen covers, not for warmth but for comfort. Linen felt smoother against the skin and was easier to launder. That inner sheet was often the only layer washed regularly, since laundering heavy wool was a complicated ordeal. So, as you drift towards sleep, you're not just snug beneath covers, you're practically entombed in an organized hierarchy of fabric. But scholars still debate just how many layers were considered normal. Some argue that even poorer knights, serving under wealthier lords, were granted enough linens and woolens to keep from freezing, since a dead retainer was of little use. Others suggest that unless a man was truly wealthy, he scraped by with a single blanket and the clothes he wore that day, relying on sheer toughness to endure. The written records are patchy. Inventories list bedding but rarely specify quantity. You're left wondering, would you be fortunate, cocooned in softness, or unfortunate, trembling under one itchy cover? Your fingers, buried beneath layers, begin to thaw. The wool scratches, yes, but it also traps the heat your body gives off. You curl tighter, and the sensation of warmth finally begins to spread inward. Slow but steady, like embers glowing in the marrow of your bones. Outside, the wind rattles at shutters, but you feel the thin boundary between your warm interior world and that endless icy black. It's fragile, like a soap bubble in winter, but it exists, and that's enough. You may think of knights as proud figures who strode across battlefields in gleaming armor, yet in moments like this, their dignity crumbled into the same universal truth. Everyone looks ridiculous, buried beneath too many layers. Imagine one of those proud men, helmet plumes streaming by day, reduced at night to a lumpy mound of wool and linen, snoring under his cap while clutching his blanket like a child. The image is strangely comforting, isn't it? Even the grandest warriors needed bedtime tricks to survive the dark. And so, you let yourself settle deeper, appreciating every scratch and fold of fabric. The night is long, the cold is sharp, but with enough layers, you have a fighting chance. Each barrier is a whisper of human ingenuity, a reminder that sometimes victory doesn't come with sword or shield, but with something as humble as wool wrapped twice around your shoulders. You shift your weight on the straw mattress, the chill still creeping through the gaps, when suddenly you notice something curious. The surface beneath you feels different depending on who you are. Not every knight, nor every noble, slept on the same kind of bedding. What separated a hard night's rest from something almost luxurious was the secret of the mattress itself. Imagine this. A simple soldier collapses on a sack filled with straw. It rustles, scratches, and pricks his skin with tiny stalks. The smell is sharp, almost barn-like, earthy, and raw. For him, this is comfort enough, better than frozen ground outside. But if fortune smiled on you, or if you happened to serve a wealthy household, you might recline on a feather mattress. Down and quills stuffed inside linen covers softened the night into something closer to floating than sleeping. That difference, the leap from straw to feathers, was as wide as the chasm between peasant and lord. One well-attested detail from the period tells us that feather beds were prized possessions, often listed in wills alongside land or jewelry. A mattress wasn't just bedding, it was a symbol of status, a declaration that your nights mattered as much as your days. When nobles travelled, their households sometimes carted feather mattresses along with them, folded or rolled, so they wouldn't have to endure common pallets. Just picture the entourage lugging great bundles of bedding up mountain passes, while the lord fussed about whether the feathers would flatten in the damp. But there's something almost comic in these accounts too. Some medieval writers mocked the wealthy for their beds of pride, insisting that soft feathers made men weak. A warrior softened by too much comfort, they claimed, would falter in battle. And yet when frost turned every joint to stone, who could really resist the lure of a cushioned retreat? Archaeological digs in old castles have revealed traces of bedding materials, bits of goose down, remains of straw mats, even fragments of rush mats that lay beneath mattresses to protect them from damp floors. The evidence suggests that sleeping arrangements varied wildly. Some rooms held simple pallets laid directly on the ground. Others boasted raised wooden frames to keep the cold earth at bay. Which one you ended up with depended not on merit, but on rank. What might surprise you is how noisy these beds could be. Straw mattresses crunched and shifted with every movement, squeaking almost like crumpled paper. Down beds, on the other hand, had their own quirks. Without careful stitching, feathers poked through the fabric, pricking skin at inconvenient moments. More than one record mentions complaints of quills stabbing the dreamer, turning what should have been luxury into a restless affair. And scholars remain divided on the prevalence of feather mattresses in knights' quarters. Some argue that only the highest nobility enjoyed such luxury, leaving even respectable knights with nothing but straw. Others point to inventories that list feather beds among the belongings of lesser households, suggesting that access was broader than once thought. The debate continues because written sources are inconsistent. One castle might detail dozens of feather mattresses, while another of equal status mentions none. Close your eyes and picture it. You ease yourself down on a mattress stuffed with straw, the scent of dry grass filling your nostrils. It rustles under your shifting body, firm but uneven. Then, imagine the alternative. A bed of goose feathers, yielding softly, wrapping you like a cloud. The two experiences are worlds apart, yet both were realities within the same castle walls. But even the grandest mattress couldn't erase the cold completely. Feather beds insulated well, trapping body heat, but in a freezing chamber with icy drafts, that warmth leaked away. You still needed heavy blankets and fur throws. So the feather bed was not salvation. It was simply one more layer in the endless war against winter. An odd anecdote survives from the household of a French nobleman. He demanded his servants rotate his feather mattress every 2 weeks, believing the feathers grew weary if always pressed the same way. Whether true or not, you can picture the grumbling attendants, flipping a massive sack of goose down while muttering about their lord's fussy superstitions. It shows how even something as ordinary as a mattress became surrounded by ritual, belief, and fuss. And of course, the symbolism of bedding went beyond comfort. In medieval culture, beds were associated with wealth, inheritance, and honor. A knight's reputation might be forged on the battlefield, but his private prestige was displayed in how he slept. Feather mattresses, silk sheets if available, embroidered covers, these were not just for warmth but for display, markers of a man's standing in the world. Not every knight cared, of course. Some preferred the plain roughness of straw, declaring it toughened their bodies. But then again, how many of them secretly longed for feathers after a frostbitten patrol? You can almost hear their sighs as they collapsed onto a prickly pallet, whispering to themselves, "Better than nothing." The scene around you now becomes clearer. You're in your chamber, choosing between 2 possible realities. On the straw bed, you fight the cold, scratch at stalks, shift to find a comfortable angle, your body complaining with every toss. On the feather bed, you sink into softness, lulled by the sigh of feathers shifting around you, cocooned but not immune to the icy air that creeps around the curtains. Either way, the night is long. Outside, wind hammers against the walls, rattling shutters. The fire burns low. You know that in a few hours you'll wake, your body stiff and your breath clouding. But for now, you're balanced on that mattress, whether straw or feather, and you let your imagination carry you away. And here's the thought you drift on. No matter how grand the castle, no matter how noble the knight, the battle for warmth was never truly won. The feather bed might feel like a victory, but dawn would always return, and with it, another day of shivering corridors and frosted windows. Still, for these precious hours, you sink into sleep, carried on rustling straw or yielding feathers, and that's enough to survive the coldest nights. The mattress beneath you has given what little relief it can, but soon you realize that bedding alone cannot win the struggle. To truly stand a chance against the night's grip, knights often turn to another solution: animal skins. You draw a heavy pelt over yourself, and instantly the scent hits musky, earthy, carrying whispers of the forest it once belonged to. There's no mistaking it. You're not only lying beneath warmth, you're lying beneath a memory of the hunt. Contemporary descriptions of noble households confirm that pelts were among the most valued forms of insulation. Thick hides of deer, bear, wolf, or even boar might be draped across a bed. They were heavy, their weight pressing down like an anchor, but in that pressure came safety. Fur trapped warmth in a way that woven cloth struggled to match. A knight who returned frozen from a patrol would sink into such covers and feel life return slowly to his limbs. The sensation wasn't immediate comfort, but rather a gradual thaw-like fire catching on damp wood, hesitant yet relentless. What's curious is how the type of fur mattered not only for warmth but for prestige. Bearskins carried an aura of power, linked to the animal's strength. Wolf pelts evoked the wild danger outside the castle walls, now conquered and domesticated on your bed. Deer hides suggested nobility, echoing the hunts that were the privilege of lords. Even the choice of which animal you slept beneath was a kind of silent brag, a nightly reminder of status. One vivid anecdote from a 14th century inventory mentions a noblewoman's bed layered with no fewer than 8 pelts, each trimmed with embroidery. Can you imagine? The hides themselves spoke of hunting prowess, but the stitching turned them into art. A visitor peeking into that chamber would see not just warmth but wealth stitched into every seam. Yet there's another side to this story: the smell. Unlike clean wool, pelts often retained the sense of tanning oils, animal musk, or lingering damp. Imagine curling beneath fur and catching a whiff of something halfway between leather and barnyard. It was effective, yes, but never fully refined. Some chronicles even joke about knights crawling into bed, only to be reminded of the very beast they fought earlier that year. Sleep came wrapped in reminders that the wild was never far away. Archaeological remains also suggest practical uses. Fur throws doubled as cloaks during travel. A knight on campaign might roll a pelt into his pack, sleeping beneath it in the open fields one night and laying it across his castle bed the next. Portability mattered. Unlike massive feather mattresses, pelts could follow a man wherever he roamed, making them an adaptable defense against both drafty chambers and frozen battle camps. What might amuse you is the way some chroniclers described noble arguments about fur ownership. Families passed down particular pelts as heirlooms, almost as if they were jewels. Brothers quarreled over who inherited the great bear skin, believing it too valuable to be split. When you pause to think about it, the idea of warriors bickering like children over a blanket feels oddly human, doesn't it? And specialists today still debate how widespread the use of pelts truly was. Some argue that every knightly household possessed at least a few, since hunting was both sport and necessity. Others caution that written records skew toward elites, leaving us to wonder whether lesser retainers relied on coarse wool alone. Excavations reveal scraps of fur in modest dwellings too, suggesting pelts weren't solely noble luxuries. The evidence remains tantalizing but incomplete. As you lie here in your imagined chamber, you can feel the texture of fur beneath your fingertips, coarse guard hairs on the outside, softer undercoat pressed against your skin. There's a strange intimacy to it, a reminder that the line between civilization and wilderness was thin. Each night, knights cocooned themselves not just in cloth woven by human hands, but in the skins of creatures that once prowled the same forests where hunts were staged. The bed itself became a meeting point between man and nature. Close your eyes, and the sensation deepens. The weight of pelts holds you steady, grounding you, almost like an embrace from the earth itself. Beyond the shuttered windows, wolves howl at the moon, their cries piercing the stillness. Inside, one of their cousins lies across your chest, no longer a threat but a shield. It's unsettling and comforting at once. There's another curious practice worth noting. Pelts sometimes lined the insides of bed curtains, creating miniature caves of warmth. Picture drawing heavy drapes around you, their inner surfaces fur-lined, transforming your bed into a den. You'd crawl inside, close the curtains, and suddenly you weren't a knight in a drafty chamber anymore. You were something closer to an animal in hibernation. And perhaps that's exactly what cold demanded: surrendering pride, mimicking the beasts, and letting instinct carry you through the season. Of course, this all had limits. Even the warmest fur couldn't block every draft. When the fire in the hearth died low, when the wind knifed through cracks in the shutters, the chill would sneak back in. You might pull pelts tighter, bury your nose in their folds, and still wake to frost clinging to your beard. Nothing in a medieval castle was absolute protection. Comfort was relative, measured not by how cozy you felt, but by whether you survived the night with your blood still flowing. And yet, imagine the psychological comfort. After hours of icy corridors, clanking armor, or relentless training in the yard, crawling beneath pelts must have felt like a victory. You could almost hear your body sigh with relief, muscles unclenching, breath slowing, warmth creeping back in. It wasn't luxury by modern terms, but it was survival wrapped in fur. So, as you drift deeper into this imagined night, you tug the pelt higher. The musk fades as your senses dull, leaving only weight and warmth. Outside, snowdrifts pile higher against the stone walls. Somewhere, servants bank the fire with the last scraps of wood. And you, knight of the cold season, surrender to sleep beneath the silent guardianship of animals whose skins have become your fortress within a fortress. The pelts are heavy across your body, but still the cold creeps in at the edges. You start to understand why a castle never relied on bedding alone. There's a fire across the room, its glow faint against the damp stone. The hearth is the beating heart of your chamber, and yet it feels like a distant ally, flickering bravely but failing to reach the furthest corners. You watch the flames lean and dance, their light trembling across the carved mantel, and realize how central fire was to every medieval night. One well-known fact about castle architecture is that fireplaces weren't always part of the earliest designs. Many great halls originally had open hearths in the center of the floor, smoke venting upward through a louver in the roof. Later, as construction improved, wall-mounted fireplaces with chimneys became common, especially in private chambers. These were marvels for their time, directing smoke away while offering a focused source of heat. Without them, the rooms would have been choking clouds of ash. With them, at least you could breathe while you shivered. But let's be honest, those fireplaces, noble as they looked, were still tragically inefficient. The heat they produced mostly escaped up the chimney, while drafts poured in from windows and doors. You can imagine it now, sitting close to the blaze, your face flushed warm, while your back stays icy. The contrast is almost comical, half your body in summer, half in winter, all at once. What might amuse you is how people tried to outwit that imbalance. Some households used great metal firebacks, decorated with patterns or coats of arms, to reflect heat outward into the room. Others experimented with screens or angled stones, hoping to trap warmth. None of these tricks solved the problem entirely, but they showed a kind of medieval ingenuity born of desperation. Even in castles, warmth was a puzzle no one fully mastered. A curious account from a 15th century manor mentions servants ordered to keep the fire burning throughout the night, not for light, but simply to ensure the lord could rise at dawn without shivering. You can picture the weary attendant creeping into the chamber at midnight, tossing on another log, stifling a cough as the master stirred. Fire wasn't just a convenience, it demanded constant human labor. Heat was as much about effort as it was about fuel. And that fuel itself tells another story. Castles consumed staggering amounts of wood. Whole forests were managed to supply logs for hearths and kitchens. Some households supplemented with peat or coal, though the smoke often smelled foul. When shortages came, fires burned lower, and those nights must have felt endless. Scholars continue to discuss whether these shortages influenced winter routines. Did households ration firewood? Did knights spend more time in communal halls to share warmth, leaving private chambers cold and unused? The written record doesn't give us a simple answer. Now, let's pull back into your chamber. You're tucked beneath furs, but your eyes keep drifting toward the flames. The sound of crackling wood is soothing, a soft counterpoint to the wind outside. Sparks leap like tiny stars, fading before they touch the floor. The smoke curls upward, disappearing into the chimney's throat. For a moment, the fire makes you feel secure, as if the cold will stay on the other side of the stone walls. But then, shift a little farther from the hearth, and you notice how quickly the warmth dissolves. At the bed's edge, it's already gone. The air against your skin feels heavy and damp again. Fire gave only localized comfort. Unless you slept right next to it, which risked sparks and burns, you could never escape the chill entirely. Here's an odd little practice worth picturing. Some lords had their beds positioned directly beside the fireplace, close enough that the heat touched the heavy curtains enclosing them. Servants worried about stray sparks, but the masters insisted. Better a scorched drape than a frozen nose. It's almost endearing, the thought of a mighty knight arranging his bed like a child scooting closer to the campfire. Archaeological surveys of castles show how fireplaces were built into walls thick enough to walk inside. Some even had secret passages for servants to add fuel without disturbing the sleeper. Imagine dozing off and never realizing a boy had slipped behind the wall to feed the flames, his presence hidden, his task unacknowledged. Warmth in such a chamber came not just from stone and wood, but from invisible human hands keeping vigil through the night. And yet, Even with this engineering, even with all that labor, the fire was still an unreliable ally. You might wake at dawn to find frost creeping along the inside of your shutters, ice crystals etched like lace across the wood. Your breath hangs in the air despite the embers still glowing red. Comfort was never absolute. It was relative, fleeting, and fragile. As you drift now, picture yourself half asleep, watching firelight ripple across the ceiling beams. The warmth brushes your cheeks but refuses to follow you into slumber. You know you'll wake cold again, but for now, there's a lullaby in the crackle, a reassurance that the night is at least being fought, even if never conquered. That's the paradox of the castle hearth, a symbol of wealth, effort, and ingenuity, yet always a reminder that even the richest night still shivered. The fire burned, but the cold always returned. Still, it gave enough to quiet your heart, to still your thoughts, and to let sleep finally come, even on the bitterest nights. The hearth has burned low now, its embers sighing more than crackling. You turn under your pelts, grateful for what little warmth remains, when you notice a smaller glow nearby. Not the great fire in the wall, but something humbler, portable braziers. These iron or bronze bowls, filled with glowing coals, were scattered through chambers like glowing guardians of the night. They're less impressive than a roaring hearth, but they gave heat exactly where you needed it most, close to your body, near your bed, by your frozen hands. Period records describe how households relied on these portable heaters not just in bedrooms, but in hallways, chapels, and even drafty stairwells. Imagine carrying one carefully by its handles, the coals shifting like red jewels inside. Set it beside your bed, and suddenly the air warms just enough for your fingers to unclench. Without it, the cold feels endless. With it, you can finally breathe without shivering. Archaeological finds confirm their widespread use. Metal braziers with soot stains still visible, some decorated with patterns of leaves or animals. These weren't only functional, they carried artistry too, a reminder that even survival could be made beautiful. You'd fall asleep with a faint orange glow at your side, shadows flickering like candlelight, but deeper, steadier, almost hypnotic. What's striking is how risky they were. Braziers consumed oxygen and filled chambers with smoke if not properly vented. There are stories of households overcome by fumes, slipping into unconsciousness never to wake again. One chronicle warns of knights who sought warmth but found death instead, a chilling reminder that survival could backfire. Even warmth had its dangers. Yet people still embraced them, because what alternative did they have? Without these glowing bowls, winter nights could numb your very marrow. With them, you could at least convince yourself that comfort existed, however temporary. There's something deeply human in that gamble, risking a smoky chamber rather than surrendering to frost. A curious note survives in the writings of a Florentine merchant. He described adding aromatic herbs to the coals, letting the smoke perfume the chamber while it warmed. Lavender, rosemary, even dried orange peels were tossed in, masking the sting of burning charcoal. Imagine drifting to sleep as fragrant smoke curls into your blankets, your senses half soothed, half unsettled. It wasn't just warmth, it was atmosphere. Researchers still debate how common such practices were outside of wealthy households. Some argue that only nobles could afford braziers in abundance, while common retainers huddled together in communal quarters, sharing body heat instead. Others believe even modest families possessed simple clay or iron heaters. The evidence remains patchy, leaving us with uncertainty and with the knowledge that your experience tonight might have depended on rank more than need. You lie back and let your imagination linger on the brazier's glow. The coals pulse, dimming and flaring like a giant's heartbeat. The air near your face grows warmer, almost spring-like, while your toes still ache in the cold. That uneven comfort is frustrating but also strangely grounding. Life in a castle was always compromise, never perfect solutions, only partial victories. An odd little custom appears in some household accounts. Servants would carry braziers into their masters' beds before sleep, sliding them under thick covers to pre-warm the sheets. At the last moment, they'd remove the glowing coals to avoid burns. The bed would remain cozy for a short while, long enough for its occupant to drift off before the chill returned. Picture yourself climbing into bed warmed by fire moments before, the sheets toasty, your sigh of relief echoing against the stone. It feels modern, doesn't it? A medieval version of an electric blanket, minus the safety guarantees. But of course, the brazier couldn't banish the castle's sounds. You still hear the hiss of wind in arrow slits, the groan of timber beams, the occasional drip of melting ice. The brazier is a small sun in the darkness, but it illuminates the coldness around it too, making the shadows seem deeper. There's comfort here, but also fragility. One careless nudge, one gust of wind, and the coals might scatter dangerously across the floor rushes. Every warm night held its risks. Still, close your eyes and linger in that moment. The faint warmth against your cheek, the perfumed smoke softening the air, the glow dancing behind your eyelids. You know the brazier will fade before dawn. You know servants will creep in to clean the ashes and reset the chamber. But for now, it is enough. You've turned a hostile room into something almost welcoming. It's easy to think of nights as men hardened to discomfort, yet here you see them just as human as anyone else, seeking warmth, risking hazards, embracing fragility for the chance of sleep. In the quiet of this chamber, with a brazier at your side, you recognize that survival is rarely glorious. It's small choices, like coals in a bowl, glowing just long enough to carry you into dreams. And as you drift, the thought lingers. Comfort in a medieval castle was never guaranteed, never complete, but always pursued with creativity. Tonight, your companion is a bowl of burning embers. Tomorrow, perhaps something else. But for now, you surrender to its glow, and finally, at last you rest. The brazier fades to embers, and you turn beneath your furs, aware once more of the draught licking at your cheeks. It's then you realize another secret weapon against the cold curtains, not the flimsy decorations you might imagine, but thick, heavy hangings that transformed a bed into a private fortress within the fortress. You tug the fabric inward, drawing it across carved posts until the world outside disappears. Suddenly, you are no longer lying in a wide, drafty chamber. You are inside a cocoon. Documented inventories from the late Middle Ages show how valuable these enclosed beds were. They weren't only for nobles, though wealth decided just how fine the fabric might be. Some had velvet, dyed deep with costly pigments. Others made do with wool or rough linen. Whatever the material, the idea was the same. Stop the ceaseless drafts by building a tent within the room. The curtain created a microclimate, keeping in the heat of your body, the warmth of your breath, even the faint glow of a brazier tucked nearby. And you notice something immediately once the curtains are drawn. The sound changes. The echoes of the chamber fade, replaced by muffled silence. The wind still moans through arrow slits, but it feels distant now, softened by layers of fabric. You hear only the rasp of your own breath, the faint rustle as you shift beneath pelts. The bed becomes an island of peace in a stormy sea of stone. One striking piece of evidence comes from household accounts that describe the labor involved. Curtains had to be washed, or at least beaten free of soot, repaired when moths chewed through, and carefully drawn each night by servants. A great bed might require 2 or 3 attendants to arrange properly. You can picture them bustling about, pulling cords, fastening ties, and smoothing fabric, while their master waited impatiently to crawl inside. What may surprise you is how much privacy these curtains provided in a world where solitude was rare. Castles were crowded, chambers shared by attendants, guards, or family members. To draw the bed curtains was not only to keep warm, but to vanish into your own private space. Inside, you might whisper prayers, share secrets, or simply relish the silence. The curtains were both insulation and escape. Accounts from the period even mention bed curtains embroidered with religious scenes or family heraldry, a nightly reminder of faith and lineage. Imagine falling asleep each night, gazing at stitched saints or your own coat of arms, their outlines lit faintly by candlelight. For a night, the bed was not just a place of rest, but a canvas of identity. Not all scholars agree on how effective these curtains were. Some argue that in large, drafty halls, their impact was minimal warmth, still leaked away through the top and bottom. Others insist that even a slight barrier could make the difference between sleepless shivering and comfortable slumber. Perhaps both are true. It likely depended on the thickness of the fabric, the size of the bed, and the determination of the sleeper. Now, imagine yourself inside one. You slide into the narrow space, pull the curtains tight, and suddenly the chamber feels far away. The warmth of your body builds quickly, your breath fogging the air until it grows almost stuffy. The darkness is deep, broken only by the faintest glow where the fabric overlaps. You are safe, sheltered, suspended between waking and sleep. There's a curious anecdote from the court of Burgundy. One duke reportedly kept a small dog at the foot of his curtained bed, believing its body heat added to his own. Whether true or not, the image is delightful, a mighty lord, conqueror of battles, huddled in a fabric cave with a furry companion snoring by his toes. It speaks volumes about the universal need for warmth, and the lengths people would go to find it. Even the act of closing the curtains carried a ritual quality. Servants might murmur blessings as they tied the cords, warding off both cold and spirits. In some regions, it was believed that drafts carried illness, so the curtain was a shield against invisible dangers. You can almost hear the whispered words, the quiet rustle of fabric, the sense of finality as the last tie was secured. Inside your imagined cocoon now, the weight of the day finally lifts. No longer do you feel like a knight braced against endless discomfort. You feel, at least for a time, like someone who belongs in warmth. You sink deeper, fur against skin, fabric muffling the world, and your mind drifts. The irony, of course, is that these beds could be stifling too. Too many layers of fabric, too much trapped breath, and the air grew heavy. Some accounts describe sleepers waking in the night to pull open a corner for fresh air, only to regret it when a draft sliced through. Comfort was a delicate balance, too closed, and you sweated, too open, and you froze. Yet, for all their imperfections, curtain beds remain one of the most evocative images of medieval domestic life. They embody ingenuity, status, and the sheer determination to survive winter nights in stone fortresses. As you drift now, encased in your imagined canopy, you recognize the truth. Comfort was never guaranteed, but people created it where they could. Your eyes close, and in the muffled dark, you feel suspended in time. The chamber outside might as well not exist. The wind may howl, the fire may die, but inside this cocoon, you have found your sanctuary, and that, perhaps, was the greatest triumph of all. The curtains draw heavy around you, but as you settle deeper, you realize something important. The warmth of your chamber wasn't achieved by your hands alone. Long before you lay down, servants had scurried through the room, unseen and uncelebrated, making it ready for your sleep. Without them, no knight, no matter how gallant, would have rested easily on these frozen nights. Written accounts of noble households show how elaborate the nightly preparations could be. Servants were expected to strew fresh rushes across the floor, spread blankets, arrange pelts, and sometimes even warm the bed with hot stones wrapped in cloth. They moved quickly, often in groups, each one responsible for a small task. You can imagine the sound of their footsteps on the flagstones, the muffled voices, the clink of metal as a brazier was carried in. The work was repetitive, but it kept their masters from shivering awake before dawn. One well-documented detail from 14th century household rolls reveals that servants laid warming pans filled with glowing embers beneath sheets, drawing them out just before the knight climbed into bed. It was a delicate act, too much heat, and the linens might scorch, too little, and the bed stayed cold. Picture a young page concentrating fiercely, gripping iron tongs, praying he wouldn't set fire to his lord's mattress. The risks were real, yet the effort made the difference between misery and tolerable comfort. And what might surprise you is how much of this preparation carried symbolism. Servants didn't simply make the bed, they performed a ritual of order and service. A neatly spread blanket signified loyalty. A chamber properly warmed before its master entered declared discipline and respect. In households where hierarchy mattered more than anything, even a bed could reflect the structure of obedience. There are curious anecdotes scattered in letters and chronicles. One mentions a nobleman who scolded his attendants because the rushes on the floor weren't sprinkled with enough herbs. Another describes a lady's chamber where the servants scented the air with burning rosemary before sleep, claiming it chased away unwholesome vapors. Whether superstition or genuine belief, these touches turned the act of bedtime into something layered with meaning, not merely practicality. Modern researchers continue to discuss how extensive such preparations were outside of aristocratic circles. Some argue that only the grandest castles enjoyed such rituals, while lesser knights had to prepare their chambers themselves, relying on squires rather than a troop of servants. Others suggest that even modest households practiced smaller versions of these routines, because warmth was not a luxury, it was survival. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. Imagine yourself now in that chamber. The servants have been and gone, leaving behind faint traces of their work. The fire glows steadily because someone carefully stoked it. The floor smells faintly of herbs, masking the damp stone beneath. The bedclothes are arranged neatly, pelts smoothed and layered. You lie down into order, into warmth, into care that is invisible but tangible. Every detail around you has been touched by another hand. There's something humbling in that realization. Knights rode into battle, praised for courage, their names carried in song. But their knightly survival depended on quiet figures who never earned ballads. A chamber prepared was the true foundation of rest. Without it, no amount of bravery could keep frostbite from creeping into joints and lungs. And here's a quirky record. In some households, attendants whispered small prayers as they prepared the bed, invoking protection for their master against both cold and spirits. The line between physical and spiritual comfort blurred. When you picture a servant tucking in a fur blanket, you can almost hear him murmur, "God keep you warm tonight." It was a gesture of faith as much as duty. The routine itself must have carried a rhythm. Servants entered at twilight, performed their tasks, and slipped away silently. Pages tiptoed back in the middle of the night to check the fire, their bare feet slapping quietly on the stone. The bed you lie in now is not just a pile of fabric, it's the end result of hours of labor and vigilance. That unseen devotion lingers even as you drift to sleep. Of course, it wasn't always perfect. Records mention mistakes, forgotten coals, damp blankets, firewood not stacked properly. Masters noticed, and punishments could be sharp. One servant's lapse meant a lord's discomfort, and in the rigid hierarchy of the castle, discomfort could quickly turn to anger. Perhaps that's why they worked with such care, not simply out of duty, but out of fear. Yet, despite all this, there's a comfort in imagining their presence. Someone cared enough or was forced enough to chase away the night's chill before you arrived. Someone's unseen work surrounds you now in every layer of fabric, every glowing ember, every rush of scent in the air. You rest not only on your own strength but on the invisible labor of many hands. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear them still. The soft shuffle of feet, the quiet clink of tongs, the whispered blessing as curtains are drawn shut. The chamber is silent now, but that silence was built carefully, step by step, by those who came before. You lie there, wrapped in their work, your breath slowing. The night outside is still bitter, the wind sharp against the battlements, but in here, order has been carved out of chaos. And with that, at last, you find yourself able to let go. The servants have gone now, leaving the room prepared, yet the warmth is still tenuous. You shift beneath your blankets and pelts, thinking of one final secret that could mean the difference between comfort and misery: sharing. In the medieval world, a bed was rarely yours alone. Companionship, whether chosen or enforced, was another shield against the cold. You may imagine that knights, so fierce in their armor, demanded solitude at night, but the truth is less romantic. Chronicles and household records remind us that even men of rank often slept beside squires, brothers in arms, or even fellow retainers. Sometimes it was convenience, too few beds for too many bodies. Sometimes it was strategy, warmth, multiplied when shared. And sometimes it was simply custom. To us, it might seem awkward. To them, it was survival. One clear fact appears in documents of the time. Bedding was expensive. Mattresses, blankets, pelts, curtains. These were valuable commodities, not easily replaced. Sharing preserved resources while doubling the chance of warmth. A squire might curl at the foot of his master's bed, soaking up heat while ready to serve at dawn. Companions might lie shoulder to shoulder, their body heat trapped beneath one cover. The practice was practical, and no one blushed at its necessity. There's an unusual detail tucked into one English inventory: a bed large enough for 4 people, listed as property of a wealthy knight. It wasn't extravagance, it was logistics. More bodies meant more warmth. The bed became a communal shelter, a fortress against the icy drafts. Imagine the muffled breathing in the dark. The sound of armorless men turned human again, each sigh weaving into a rhythm that lulled them towards sleep. What might amuse you is the humor that crept into such arrangements. Some accounts mention disputes about who got the warmer middle spot and who was left to guard the edge near the curtain. Brothers, friends, and squires probably joked or grumbled about cold toes poking them awake. These weren't solemn rituals. They were messy, human moments, where laughter and irritation mingled with the need to stay alive. Researchers continue to puzzle over how often knights actually shared with peers rather than subordinates. Some suggest that rank-determined placement lords rarely shared unless with family, while squires crowded together by the dozen. Others argue that necessity blurred those boundaries, especially during travel or war. In winter campaigns, tents were crammed with bodies, hierarchy melting away in the face of frost. The records don't agree, leaving us with a vivid but uncertain picture. You roll onto your side, imagining the warmth of another body beside you. The chamber is still cold, yes, but the shared heat makes it bearable. Your breath mingles with theirs, forming faint clouds in the curtained dark. There's an intimacy here, not romantic, not necessarily even friendly, but born of necessity. To survive the night, you accept closeness. To wake alive, you surrender privacy. An odd anecdote survives from a Burgundian chronicle. 2 knights complained about their lord's snoring, so thunderous it kept the entire chamber awake. Yet neither dared move from his side, because the heat in the middle of the bed was far better than the chill on the outer edge. Picture that proud warriors enduring sleepless nights, trapped between irritation and frostbite. It's comical, but also deeply relatable. There's also the memory of squires, young men training under knights, who shared bunks in drafty rooms. They laughed, whispered, and sometimes quarreled late into the night, their chatter echoing off the stone. The bonds forged in those moments were as strong as those made on the battlefield. Sleep was survival, yes, but it was also fellowship. And the truth is, historians still discuss whether such shared sleeping arrangements were viewed as purely practical, or also carried social significance. Did it strengthen loyalty, reminding squires of their dependence on their lords? Did it blur lines between classes during harsh winters? Or was it simply one more compromise, forgotten in the morning rush to don armor and face the day? No single answer satisfies everyone. The image lingers, though. A chamber curtained, a brazier glowing faintly, and beneath heavy blankets 2 or 3 bodies pressed close. The smell of wool, leather, and smoke lingers. The air grows warmer by degrees, until, despite yourself, you drift. Close your eyes and picture it fully now. You are not alone in this castle night. Someone's breath rustles softly in the dark. The cold no longer feels like an unbeatable enemy. It's merely held at bay by human presence. You may not have chosen this arrangement, but you accept it. Warmth is worth the awkwardness. Survival is worth the closeness. And in that moment, as your body relaxes at last, you realize that the greatest defense against the coldest medieval night was not stone, or fire, or pelts. It was each other. The quiet of shared breathing lulls you towards sleep, but just as your eyes close, another scent stirs in the chamber. It isn't the musk of pelts or the smoke of a brazier, it's green, fresh, faintly sweet. You open your eyes and remember what lies underfoot: rushes. Every few weeks, servants scattered these reeds or straw-like plants across the floor, both to soften the hardness of stone and to cover odors that would otherwise sour the air. Tonight, the fragrance rises gently, mixing with the smoke and the damp, and you realize you're lying in a room that smells like a meadow and a chimney at once. Written records from castles and manors describe the custom clearly. Floors were covered with rushes or hay, sometimes mixed with herbs like lavender, chamomile, or rosemary. They insulated slightly against the cold and offered a hint of pleasant aroma amid the mustiness. This wasn't just decoration, it was a form of hygiene before tiled floors and carpets became common. And in a chamber where knights and squires tramped in mud, ash and sweat, any attempt at freshness mattered. What's fascinating is how practical and symbolic the rushes were. The crunch beneath your boots reminded you that the chamber had been renewed, its filth buried for now. Guests noticed it too. Stepping onto green rushes meant you entered a place cared for, where someone had made an effort to welcome and protect. Even a knight, exhausted from campaign, could recognize that detail and feel reassured. There's a peculiar little note from a 15th century household roll. It describes adding fennel and mint to the rushes to sweeten the Lord's dream. Whether it truly influenced sleep or not, the idea is charming that herbs underfoot could drift upward into slumber, weaving calmness into the night. Imagine the faint hint of mint curling into your breath as you pull a blanket closer. Archaeologists have found traces of such floor coverings in castles, confirming their use over centuries. The mixture of plant matter often included hay, leaves, even straw from stables. That explains the variety of smells one might encounter, some sweet, some distinctly less so. You can almost picture yourself trying to fall asleep while the scent of rosemary tangles with something unmistakably barnyard. Survival rarely smelled perfect. But there's debate among scholars about how often rushes were replaced. Some argue they were changed regularly, especially in wealthy households that could afford constant labor. Others suggest they lingered for months, layers of old and new compacted together, trapping not only scent but vermin. The truth likely varied. A noble chamber might enjoy fresh herbs weekly, while lesser rooms sank into filth until spring cleaning. You, lying here tonight, are fortunate the rushes smell newly laid, fragrant enough to soften the castle's damp chill. What may surprise you is how the sound of rushes contributed to the atmosphere. When a servant crossed the floor, the reeds rustled gently. When you shifted in bed, the faint crunch echoed up. In a chamber otherwise filled with stone's hollow silence, those sounds were strangely soothing, like the whisper of grass under a summer breeze, carried into winter. You might almost trick yourself into believing you were outdoors in warmer months, not trapped in icy walls. Curiously, some noble households took pride in the particular herbs they scattered. One chronicler describes a lady who boasted of using rose petals among her rushes, an extravagance bordering on ridiculous. Imagine lying in your bed, smelling roses beneath your boots, while outside the moat froze solid. Luxury, after all, was often more about display than effectiveness. You roll onto your side, pulling your furs tighter, and let the mixed scents drift around you. There's smoke, damp, leather, but also lavender, mint, hay. The cocktail is imperfect, but strangely calming. In a world where baths were infrequent and castle walls seeped moisture, this freshness mattered deeply. It wasn't only about air, it was about spirit. To sleep in a room that smelled alive was to remember that winter would eventually end. And here's an odd anecdote. In some places, rushes were believed to carry protective powers, warding off illness that came through the air. The belief was that good smells kept out bad humors, a primitive form of germ theory wrapped in superstition. Servants weren't simply scattering herbs, they were building a defense against unseen dangers. It was comfort layered in ritual, much like the curtains and pelts above. Of course, as the night drags on, the fragrance fades. By morning, you'll smell mostly smoke and sweat again, but for these few hours, the rushes soften not only the floor but the atmosphere itself. They remind you that even in a world of iron and stone, people sought beauty, however small, in the places they slept. Your eyelids grow heavy. Beneath you, the faint rustle of herbs. Around you, curtains blocking drafts. Over you, pelts pressed close. And within you, a growing sense of calm. You realize that survival in a medieval castle wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about finding little fragments of comfort sounds, scents, textures that made the night bearable. Tonight, that comfort comes from the meadow under your feet, carried into your dreams. The fragrance of the rushes lingers faintly, but as you shift in your curtained cocoon, another reality presses in. The castle itself was never truly sealed. Drafts found every gap, slipping in like invisible fingers. You pull your blankets higher, but the chill still slides across your cheeks. Step outside the bed curtains for a moment, and the truth becomes obvious. The corridors of stone are rivers of icy air. Descriptions from visitors to medieval castles make this clear. Even the most solid stronghold was riddled with cracks, joints between stones, gaps around wooden shutters. Arrow slits let in more than just light. They funneled wind with a sharp whistle. Large halls with their towering ceilings trapped echoes but not warmth. Imagine walking down one of those corridors barefoot at night. The stone so cold it bites into your soles. The air rushing past so strong it makes your eyes water. A knight, hardened by battle, might still curse under his breath at the misery of it. Evidence from castle ruins shows how little insulation existed. The walls were thick, yes, but thickness alone did not equal warmth. Once the stone absorbed winter's chill, it radiated cold like a glacier. No tapestry, no curtain could completely stop it. The very design that kept invaders out turned the building itself into a kind of refrigerator. What might surprise you is the constant noise that accompanied these drafts. Wind didn't merely pass through, it sang. You'd hear whistling at shutters, moaning in hallways, a low hum where cracks channeled air. At night, lying awake, it was easy to imagine those sounds as voices. Servants whispered of ghosts carried by the wind, souls of the restless who roamed the corridors. The soundscape of a medieval night was as unsettling as it was uncomfortable. And here lies a point of contention among modern historians. Some argue that tapestries and wooden panelling significantly reduced drafts in noble chambers, while others insist the improvements were minimal. Surviving accounts describe both comfort and complaint, leaving us uncertain. Perhaps the experience varied from one castle to another, or even from one room to the next. Your chamber tonight is only partially defended. The curtains help, but every time you shift them, you feel the current sneak in again. An odd note comes from a 13th century letter where a guest complained that his candle kept blowing out in a lord's chamber because of a wind that rushed as though the wall itself breathed. Picture that inside a fortress, your flame sputtering like you stood in the open field. It's both absurd and believable, given the architecture. You smile grimly, tugging your blanket tighter, knowing how true it must have been. Walking the corridors, especially at night, was even worse. Guards paced their routes, cloaks wrapped tight, stamping their boots just to keep circulation. You can almost hear the echo of their footsteps now, mixed with the rattle of doors and the groan of timbers. Every draft carried more than cold, it carried sound, turning each hallway into an instrument played by winter itself. And yet, Despite all this, people adapted. Heavy wall hangings softened the bite of air. Doorways were draped with thick curtains, sometimes layered with fur. Even beds themselves were placed strategically, away from exterior walls if possible. A knight knew that the difference between a tolerable night and an unbearable one might come down to where his bed stood in relation to a draft. Placement mattered almost as much as bedding. Still, you can't help but notice how much energy was spent fighting what your own home would solve with a single pane of glass. Comfort was always partial, always temporary. Even nobles wrapped in layers and curtained beds woke to find frost clinging to their blankets. Drafts were inescapable, part of the fabric of castle life. Close your eyes now and picture the corridor outside your chamber. The torches flicker, their flames bent sideways by invisible gusts. Shadows shiver on the walls, never still. A guard trudges past, his cloak snapping faintly as he turns a corner. Somewhere, a shutter bangs softly, then again, a rhythm set by the night wind. That is the reality of a castle's sleep, not silence, not calm, but a restless partnership with moving air. And here's the curious irony. The same openings that chilled you by night protected you by day. Arrow slits, wide inside and narrow outside, let defenders shoot safely while keeping attackers at bay. The drafts that robbed your warmth were the price of your security. In other words, the castle's defenses were always also your discomfort. Safety and shivering came as a pair. The awareness creeps into your half-dreaming mind. Every breath of cold air, every sigh of wind, is part of the architecture itself. The castle is alive in a way, breathing through its gaps, reminding you that you're never entirely sheltered. You're surviving not because the fortress shields you perfectly, but because you've learned to endure its flaws. You roll back beneath your pelts, grateful for your curtained cocoon. Outside it, the chamber is a cavern of restless drafts. Inside, you've carved a bubble of warmth, and as your breathing slows, the moan of wind in the corridors becomes background music, unwanted, eerie, but constant. You fall asleep, not in silence, but in partnership with the cold. The wind has become a companion now, its voice weaving through the stone like a restless spirit. You lie in your curtained bed, warmed by pelts and shared body heat, lulled by the soft crunch of rushes beneath the servants' boots earlier. Yet even wrapped in warmth, your ears stay open. In the deep of night, sound carried through the castle with uncanny clarity, and what you heard shaped your sleep as much as what you felt. Contemporary descriptions often remark on the strangeness of night in a medieval fortress. There was no hum of machines, no traffic outside the walls, no background of electric life. Instead, silence was broken only by elemental things. The creak of timbers, the whistle of drafts, the occasional crack of settling stone. And beyond those, the sounds of the human presence within, guards stamping in the courtyard, dogs barking below, the distant clang of a chain. In such stillness, every noise seemed louder, sharper, more significant. Archaeological reconstructions of castles demonstrate how sound carried. The stone walls amplified echoes. A whisper in a stairwell might travel far, while a dropped poker in the great hall could reverberate into upper chambers. Imagine trying to drift into dreams while hearing footsteps far away that seemed, in the silence, to march just outside your curtain. For a knight, trained to be alert, that half-awareness never truly faded. Sleep was always lighter in such surroundings, never fully surrendered. What may surprise you is how much the silence itself unsettled people. To modern ears, it might sound peaceful, but to those who lived surrounded by chatter, clatter, and labor all day, the sudden stillness of night felt unnatural. Chronicles even speak of noblemen, unnerved by the absence of sound, interpreting it as an omen. When the dogs stopped barking or the wind paused, hearts quickened in the dark. What was coming that made the castle hold its breath? And there were always the stories, the legends of ghosts wandering drafty corridors, of murdered retainers, of ladies in white drifting near the chapel. Servants whispered these tales, and once planted, They seeped into the dreams of even the most hardened knight. Close your eyes in that cocoon, and the groan of a beam becomes a sigh from some forgotten soul. The wail of wind through arrow slits becomes a lament. Sleep came, but always with unease. There's an amusing little record from a manor in France. One guest wrote of being kept awake by the complaining stair, a wooden step that groaned so loudly each time it shifted that he swore spirits marched up and down all night. In reality, it was just timber responding to cold. But to a mind half asleep, the difference between wood and ghost was not always clear. Specialists today still debate how restful castle sleep truly was. Some argue that fatigue from labor and training overpowered any distraction. Men dropped into slumber regardless of noises. Others counter that frequent mentions of restless nights in letters suggest otherwise, that the environment itself intruded constantly. The discussion remains unsettled, but if you lie here, imagining the castle around you, it's easy to believe both. Exhaustion tugged you into dreams, while every creak and echo pulled you back again. You shift under your blankets and listen carefully. The soundscape sharpens. The flutter of a shutter, a guard's muffled cough outside, the distant howl of a wolf carried in on the wind. The castle feels both immense and intimate, vast halls echoing with noise, yet close enough that you hear another man clearing his throat through two walls. Privacy was never complete. The night reminded you of that. And yet, oddly, those same sounds could comfort. The guard's footsteps meant someone was awake, keeping watch. The dog's barks meant the outer yard still lived. Even the moan of the wind reminded you that you were sheltered behind stone, rather than exposed in a field. Knights on campaign slept in tents, exposed to every gust and predator. In comparison, a creaking beam felt like reassurance you were indoors, at least, and protected. What might amuse you now is to imagine the mixed chorus of the castle at night. Snores from shared chambers, the drip of water through a gutter, the faint neigh of a horse below. None of it matched, yet together it created a kind of lullaby, a pattern you grew used to. The very noises that frightened you the first nights became the rhythms of survival. In time, you couldn't sleep without them. There's a moment, lying awake, when the castle seems alive. The timbers creak like joints, the wind moans like breath, the walls hum faintly with shifting stone. It feels less like you're inside a building, and more like you're curled in the belly of some enormous creature. Safe for now, though never entirely in control. Close your eyes again. The silence is never whole, but it grows softer, wrapping itself around you. The sounds of the castle fade into one another, creating a background hum that finally lets your mind drift. You surrender to it, realizing that for nights in these fortresses, sleep was never about eliminating disturbance. It was about accepting it, letting the creaks, the moans, and the whispers become part of the dream itself. And so you rest, half cradled by the stone, half haunted by it, knowing that morning will come, and with it, the noise of life again. But for now, in the quiet chaos of medieval night, you finally slip into uneasy but inevitable slumber. You lie there in the muffled silence, your body warmed by pelts and blankets, but your thoughts linger on rituals. For a night, the coldest nights weren't simply endured through fabric and fire, they were softened by prayer. Before crawling beneath curtains and furs, you would have knelt, clasped your hands, and whispered words to the heavens, asking not only for warmth, but for safety through the darkness. Manuscripts and personal accounts confirm that evening prayers were a daily habit. Compline, the final office of the day in the monastic tradition, influenced lay practice as well. Knights, especially those bound by oaths to orders or lords, recited psalms before sleep. Latin phrases rolled softly off their tongues. In manus tuas, Domine, into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. Imagine kneeling at the bedside, breath fogging in the air, whispering these words while the fire flickered low. The chamber was not only a bedroom, it became, for a moment, a chapel. And these prayers were not always lofty. Many were simple petitions, for the safety of family, for health, for protection against fever or frost. One common plea asked God to shield us from the perils of the night. In a castle filled with draughts, sickness, and the ever-present risk of attack, such perils felt tangible. You might not be afraid of swords while awake, but in sleep you were vulnerable. Prayer was armor for the hours you could not defend yourself. What may surprise you is how physical these rituals were. Knights often crossed themselves, kissed a crucifix hung beside the bed, or traced blessings onto blankets. These gestures were tactile comforts, as much about soothing the body as saving the soul. Imagine touching cool metal at your lips, then crawling beneath rough wool, the sensation grounding you between earth and heaven. Curiously, some knights kept small relics or charms tucked into their pillows. A fragment of saint's bone, a sliver of the true cross, or a blessed medal. Whether out of faith or superstition, these tokens gave reassurance in the lonely hours. If the wind howled too fiercely, if dreams turned dark, one could clutch at the hidden relic and believe safety lay within it. A soldier who faced death daily in battle still wanted heavenly insurance while he slept. Researchers still discuss whether such prayers were deeply felt or merely routine. Some argue knights prayed with sincerity, steeped in a culture where faith was inseparable from life. Others suspect it became habitual, more rote than heartfelt words muttered while already half asleep. The truth, as always, is likely both. In a world so uncertain, the line between faith and superstition blurred, and ritual itself was the comfort. There's a charming anecdote recorded from a 14th century knight. He admitted to falling asleep mid-prayer, kneeling by his bed, head bowed forward onto the mattress. His squire found him still in that posture at dawn. Was it devotion or exhaustion? Perhaps both. It paints a picture of men caught between piety and fatigue, clinging to ritual even when sleep claimed them. Imagine yourself now performing the same act. You kneel beside the bed, your knees pressing into cold rushes, your breath clouding in the torchlight. You murmur psalms, your voice low, almost blending with the wind. The firelight dances on a wooden crucifix above, its shadow stretching across the stone. In that moment, you feel not just cold but small, humbled by the enormity of night. Prayer gives you the courage to surrender to sleep, trusting that the world will still be there when you wake. And what might amuse you is how prayers also served as a kind of medieval sleep aid. The rhythm of reciting verses, the repetitive cadence of Latin chants, lulled the mind. Just as lullabies soothe children today, so did these chants ease warriors. Faith and function walked hand in hand. Words for God also doubled as music for sleep. Close your eyes and sense the peace that follows. The prayers linger in the chamber, woven into the very air. Outside, draughts may howl, wolves may cry, but inside, you feel cradled in more than blankets. You feel shielded by something larger, something invisible. Whether divine or imagined, it is enough. You lie back, your body heavy, your mind lighter. The cold still exists, the risks remain, but your heart slows. You've armed yourself not with steel but with words, and now you can rest. For a night in the coldest nights, that spiritual armor was as important as any fur or fire. It gave courage to close your eyes in a world where sleep was never without danger. And so you drift, the final echoes of prayer wrapping you like a second set of curtains, sealing you against the dark. Your whispered prayers have faded into the stillness, but even as you surrender to sleep, you are never truly alone. Outside your curtained cocoon, on the walls and in the courtyards, men remain awake. Sentries keep watch through the bitter hours, their task as endless as the winter night itself. You can almost picture them, cloaks drawn tight, torches sputtering in the wind, eyes heavy yet alert. While you nestle under pelts, they stamp their feet against frozen flagstones, shifting from one leg to the other to keep blood flowing. Castle records and military ordinances often mention the rotation of guards. Even in smaller households, someone had to remain alert at night, lest thieves, enemies, or fire catch the inhabitants unawares. Squires and men-at-arms shared this duty, trudging along battlements while others slept. The wind howled hardest there, unbroken by walls, cutting through wool and into bone. Imagine leaning against a parapet, breath turning instantly to vapor, fingers stiff around a spear shaft. Hours crawled by, and still the cold deepened. One detail we know with certainty: guards devised countless tricks to endure their vigils. Chronicles describe them clapping their hands together, walking brisk laps of the wall, or crouching near small braziers where lords permitted them. In some places, dogs kept with the guards gave warning of strangers while lending warmth, their shaggy bodies pressed against men's boots. The image is oddly touching: a soldier sharing duty with a hound, both shivering, both listening for sounds in the dark. What may surprise you is that the sounds of these sentries often drifted back into chambers like yours. The echo of boots on stone, the distant murmur of voices, even the clang of weapons knocked together, all reminders that vigilance never ceased. Lying in bed, you might drift toward dreams while faintly aware of those unseen guardians outside. The thought was reassuring, though also a reminder of danger lurking beyond the walls. A curious account from a German castle mentions sentries punished for falling asleep by being forced to stand barefoot in the snow. The cruelty of such measures makes you wince, but it underscores how vital their wakefulness was. A single lapse could endanger all within. Thus the guards suffered so you could rest. Their misery was the price of your uneasy comfort. Researchers today still discuss whether guards' presence genuinely reassured sleepers or unsettled them. Some argue the rhythmic sounds of patrol lulled residents like a protective heartbeat. Others suggest it reminded them of threats outside, preventing true relaxation. Perhaps it was both: reassurance wrapped in tension, comfort edged with unease. Imagine it now. You lie beneath pelts, eyes half closed, while faint footsteps echo along the battlements. A low murmur of voices drifts through shutters, followed by the bark of a watchdog. The wind rushes, the fire hisses, but still those sounds continue, a living rhythm outside your walls. You know men are cold, weary, and perhaps cursing their fate. Yet you also know their presence is why you can let go, however briefly. And here's an odd, almost humorous note from a chronicle. One knight complained he could not sleep because the sentry's stamping feet beneath his window shook the shutters all night. The irony is sharp. The very man meant to protect his rest disturbed it instead. You can almost see the grumpy lord glaring at dawn, while the shivering guards saluted through chattering teeth. Beyond the walls, the countryside lies silent under frost. The moat glimmers with a thin crust of ice, and the forest beyond seems frozen in time. Yet within this fortress, life continues, even in the smallest hours. Fires smolder, dogs stir, and men keep vigil. You, wrapped in pelts, feel a thread connecting you to them. Their wakefulness is your blanket, their stamping feet are your lullaby. Close your eyes again, and you can almost imagine standing there yourself, armor traded for wool, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. The cold gnaws, the hours stretch. Yet behind you, families sleep, lords dream, and children murmur in their beds. The responsibility is weighty, but also strangely sacred. To guard the night is to shoulder the safety of all within. As sleep pulls you deeper, those sentries remain in your thoughts. You know they will still be there at dawn, weary but steadfast. Their duty frames your dreams, a reminder that rest in a medieval castle was always collective. Some endured the night awake, so that others could close their eyes. And with that, you let yourself drift. Outside, men stamp their boots, dogs bark at shadows, and torches gutter in the wind. Inside, you breathe slowly, warmed by blankets and faith. Together, their watch and your slumber weave the fragile fabric of survival in the coldest nights. The guards outside march on, their boots echoing against frozen stone. Inside your curtained nest, you shift and feel an immense relief. Your armor is not on you. The weight of chainmail and plate, That iron shell worn through daylight hours has been cast aside. For a night, this nightly shedding was as necessary as food or fire. To sleep in armor was nearly impossible. The body ached, the joints pinched, the cold bit even sharper where metal pressed against flesh. Accounts from campaigns describe how men sometimes collapsed in armor out of exhaustion, but these were exceptions born of necessity, not choice. In castles, at least, the nightly ritual involved unbuckling straps, lifting off steel, and letting the body breathe. The first sensation of freedom after hours encased in iron must have been exquisite, the ability to stretch, to lie flat without a carapace digging into your shoulders. Imagine peeling away layer after layer, hearing buckles snap loose, until finally you stood in simple linen, almost weightless. One recorded detail tells us that chainmail shirts alone could weigh 30 pounds or more. Add greaves, gauntlets, helmet, and breastplate, and you carried the weight of a small child with every step. It shaped posture, gait, even thought. To lay it aside at night was to reclaim your body. The bed became not just rest, but relief, a pause in a life otherwise chained to steel. And yet, the traces of that weight lingered in sleep. Some chroniclers speak of nights dreaming of armor even while bare, their limbs twitching as if still bound. The heaviness of war seeped into the marrow, carried even into slumber. You can almost feel it yourself, a phantom weight pressing across your chest, echoing the burden you left on the chamber floor. There's a curious anecdote from a French source. One knight insisted on keeping his helmet within arm's reach of the bed, convinced he might be attacked in the night. He slept under fur, yes, but with one hand resting on polished steel. Imagine the unease of dozing while your palm grazed cold iron, half comforted, half cursed by its presence. Scholars today still discuss how armor shaped the health of those who wore it daily. Some suggest chronic back pain, compressed joints, and stiff muscles plagued knights even in youth. Others argue their bodies adapted, toughened by training, making them resilient. The evidence is mixed, but either way, the act of stripping armor before bed must have felt like unshackling the soul. As you lie here now, your body feels lighter. The blankets weigh on you, but compared to mail, they are nothing. You roll your shoulders, flex your legs, marvel at how soft fur feels against skin no longer pressed by steel. The sensation is almost giddy, like floating after being anchored all day. What might surprise you is how much ritual surrounded armor storage. Squires carefully arranged each piece near the bed, polished when possible, checked for damage. Some knights even named their armor, speaking to it like a comrade. It wasn't just equipment, it was identity. And so, even in sleep, it remained close, a silent sentinel at the bedside. But the nightmares it brought could not always be left behind. Tales survive of knights who muttered in their dreams, reliving battles, flinching as if struck by unseen blows. The armor shaped not just their waking hours, but their unconscious ones. Sleep gave rest to muscles, but not always to minds. Close your eyes now, and you can imagine that phantom heaviness pressing into your dreams. You turn in your cocoon of fur, whispering a sigh of gratitude that at least tonight your body is free. The chill of the chamber still bites, but without steel clinging to you, warmth has a chance. An odd little note from a chronicle in Burgundy describes a knight so unused to sleeping without armor during campaigns that, once home, he spent weeks waking in panic, feeling naked. It took time for him to trust his bed curtains, his guards, his walls. Even warmth felt strange, after so long accustomed to hardness. Sleep, like battle, demanded adaptation. And so here you are, lying weightless after days of burden. Your sword rests on a stool, your chainmail folded in a chest, your helmet gleaming faintly in the firelight. You are no less a knight for being unarmored tonight. In fact, you are more human, closer to the boy you once were, before steel claimed your days. The pelts press softly against your skin, the rushes crackle faintly underfoot, and you let yourself drift. The armor waits, patient and silent, but for now, It is no longer your master. Sleep comes easier when iron is not your blanket, when the only weight you carry is that of your own weary body. And in this fragile peace, you finally find something closer to comfort than conquest. The relief of being free from armor lingers as you stretch beneath your furs, but memory pulls you back to a time before you had even earned the right to call yourself a knight. You think of the years as a squire, when sleep was not private or cocooned, but communal. The quarters of young trainees were crowded, noisy, and rarely warm. If noble chambers felt like draughty caves, the dormitories of squires resembled barns with beds. Descriptions in household accounts make this clear. Dozens of boys, sometimes as young as 12, crowded together in long chambers. They lay on pallets of straw or thin mattresses, wrapped in whatever blankets were available. Curtains? Those were reserved for their masters. Privacy was a luxury they didn't know. Instead, their warmth came from numbers, bodies pressed side by side, the air thick with breath, sweat, and youthful chatter. One well-documented account tells us that in certain castles, squires were given no separate bedding at all, only cloaks to wrap around themselves, lying shoulder to shoulder on rush-strewn floors. Imagine that. Your bed was the same garment you wore in the yard during the day, still smelling of horse, sweat, and mud. For a boy too exhausted to care, it was enough. For one sensitive to smells, it must have been torment. What may surprise you is how lively these chambers were even in darkness. Boys whispered jokes, sang snatches of songs, wrestled under blankets, or plotted mischief. The soundscape of a squire's night was less solemn than a knight's chamber. It was full of life, even amid discomfort. Perhaps that noise made the cold more bearable. Companionship turned a freezing dorm into something closer to fellowship. An unusual anecdote survives from a 15th century account. A knight recalling his youth admitted that he often fell asleep to the sound of a dozen different snores, like a chorus in uneven rhythm. He claimed that years later, he couldn't rest in silence, he needed noise to sleep, as if his body had been trained to associate rest with chaos. You can picture him, a grown man, lying beneath embroidered curtains, missing the racket of boys elbowing each other in the dark. Archaeological studies of castle remains have uncovered wide dormitory spaces thought to house these young men. Traces of ash pits nearby suggest that fires were rarely built inside the rooms themselves. Too risky, too smoky. Warmth was secondary to practicality. Blankets, cloaks, and shared bodies were their only insulation. To fall asleep in such a place was to surrender not to comfort, but to exhaustion. And scholars still discuss whether these harsh conditions were deliberate. Some argue they toughened boys, preparing them for the rigors of knighthood. Others believe it was simply necessity. Too many mouths, too little wealth, and not enough fabric to go around. Perhaps it was both training and poverty walking hand in hand. You close your eyes and imagine yourself back there, a boy among many, curled on straw, blanket slipping off your shoulder, elbow digging into your side as your bunkmate rolls over. The air smells of hay, sweat, and smoke. The cold gnaws at your toes, but laughter and whispered gossip soften the edges. You're miserable and content at once, too tired to care. There's something oddly sweet about those memories. The discomfort forged bonds. Boys who survived winters together, shivering under shared covers, grew into men who trusted each other on battlefields. The camaraderie born in those dormitories carried into adulthood. Shared suffering was its own kind of glue. What might amuse you is that some squires wrote bitterly of being forced to rise before dawn, blankets whipped away by older men. Imagine the groans, the curses half swallowed, the scramble to find boots in the dark. Their sleep was never long, never luxurious, but perhaps that was the point, to teach discipline, to remind them that a knight's life was not about ease, even in bed. And yet, in those crowded rooms, there was warmth that no solitary curtained bed could match. The press of bodies, the hum of voices, the feeling of not being alone in the struggle, all these lingered in memory. Even as a knight now, lying in your private chamber, you remember those days and realize they shaped your resilience. The squire's dormitory was no place of comfort. but it was a place of growth. In the long winters, boys learn not only to endure the cold, but to find laughter inside it, to share strength with one another, to build bonds that armor alone could never forge. So, as you drift deeper under your noble covers tonight, you think back to that noisy hall. You hear the echoes of boys' laughter, the creak of straw, the shuffling of feet. You remember the cold, yes, but you also remember the warmth of comradeship, and you realize that even the harshest nights left behind something valuable, the memory of never having endured it alone. The memory of the squire's crowded hall fades, and your mind drifts back to your present chamber. Now you sleep not as a boy among many, but as a knight granted privacy, or at least something close to it. For those of higher rank, the difference was dramatic. Nobles often enjoyed a solar, a private room separated from the great hall, warmer and more richly furnished than the bare dormitories below. Compared to the rush-strewn barracks of your youth, this space feels like a different world. Evidence from surviving castles confirms how these solars were designed. Often placed on upper floors, away from drafty ground levels, they contained fireplaces built into the wall, glazed windows if fortune and wealth allowed, and finer furniture. Here, the bed was not simply a place to collapse, but a centerpiece elevated on carved frames, draped in curtains dyed with expensive pigments. To step into such a room was to know, instantly, who held power in the household. One well-attested fact is that tapestries lined the walls of noble solars, both for decoration and insulation. They showed scenes of hunts, battles, or biblical stories, their thick woven threads helping to soften the cold that seeped through stone. Imagine lying in bed, staring at a woven deer forever chased across a forest, while beyond the wall real deer shivered in the frosted woods. The imagery blurred the line between outside and in, making your chamber both gallery and shelter. What might surprise you is that furniture itself became a form of warmth. Nobles kept heavy wooden chests filled with clothing, blankets, and even furs, not simply as storage but as thermal anchors. The mass of wood absorbed some of the chill, breaking up the vast emptiness of the room. A space too bare felt colder, as if emptiness itself encouraged drafts. A cluttered solar, by contrast, could feel almost cozy. There's an unusual account from the 14th century describing a lord who demanded his servants light perfumed candles in his solar at night. They gave little heat, but the fragrance of beeswax mixed with herbs turned the room into something refined. He claimed it helped him sleep better, though one suspects it was as much about display as rest. Imagine drifting off while faintly smelling honey and myrrh, a sharp contrast to the earthy scents of a squire's hall. Archaeologists examining solar chambers note the presence of small alcoves, window seats padded with cushions, sometimes lined with fur. These nooks may have served as daytime retreats, but at night they offered one more layer of luxury. From bed, you could see your chamber not just as a place of sleep, but as a sanctuary layered with textures, fabrics, and details meant to remind you that you were not merely surviving winter, you were mastering it. Of course, scholars continue to debate how effective these enhancements really were. Did a solar truly feel warmer, or did tapestries and furniture only give the illusion of comfort? Some argue that nobles exaggerated their coziness in records, eager to display superiority. Others insist the difference was tangible temperature variations of several degrees between bare stone rooms and furnished solars. The argument endures, leaving us to imagine, but not to measure, the truth. Close your eyes and picture yourself here. The bed curtains are drawn tight. The fire in the corner fireplace crackles softly. Tapestries mute the drafts, and the air carries a faint sweetness of beeswax. Compared to your memories as a squire, this feels like another world. The silence is deeper, the space larger, the sense of privilege undeniable. You can stretch without bumping another body. You can breathe without inhaling someone else's snore. This is not survival alone, it is survival wrapped in status. Yet the irony remains. Even in a solar, frost still creeps along window panes, your breath still clouds in the air, and the stone beneath rushes still holds winter tight. Nobility softened the cold but never erased it. The fortress was always stronger than its inhabitants. An amusing little story survives from a household account. A nobleman boasted of sleeping warmly in his solar, only for a guest to discover his bed lined with 4 servants' cloaks beneath the covers. Even privilege needed practical reinforcement. Luxury was not always as effortless as it appeared. So tonight you rest in your private solar, grateful for the curtains, the fire, the wall hangings. You know others sleep in crowded bunks below, and you remember those nights vividly. The difference humbles you, even as you stretch into the comfort of your station. The coldest night is still cold, but the details embroidered covers, perfumed candles, woven scenes on the wall make it bearable. And as your eyes close, you realize that warmth in a medieval castle was always layered. Layers of fabric, of stone, of human effort, and of social rank. To sleep as a noble was not to escape winter, but to endure it with style, even as frost crept silently across the walls. The solar feels richer, softer, and more private than the dormitories of your youth, but even here the night carries one final touch meant to ease slumber: the pillow beneath your head. In the medieval world, pillows were not the uniform, mass-produced cushions you know today. They varied in size, material, and scent, and yes, scent mattered. For many knights and nobles, the act of laying one's head was accompanied by fragrance. Herbal sachets, sewn into linen or tucked beneath cases, turned pillows into little bundles of medicine and comfort. Household inventories mention lavender, rosemary, chamomile, and even sage used for this purpose. These herbs were believed not only to calm the mind, but also to purify the air. In an era when foul smells were thought to cause illness, a pillow stuffed with pleasant fragrance seemed both soothing and protective. Imagine lowering your head after a day in clanking armor, and inhaling the sweet, grassy perfume of lavender woven through linen. The contrast between battlefield stench and this gentle aroma must have felt heavenly. One well-preserved recipe from a 15th century household guide advises mixing dried rose petals with bay leaves and sewing them into a small linen pouch. The pouch was then slipped into the pillow. The writer claimed it brought sweet dreams and eased the head. Whether true or not, it shows how seriously people took the idea of shaping sleep through smell. And here's something unusual. Some households used hops, the same plant later beloved for beer brewing, as pillow stuffing. It was said to induce drowsiness. Chroniclers note that monks often used hot pillows in infirmaries. Imagine resting your cheek against a cushion faintly reeking of a brewery, comforted by the belief it would coax you into slumber. Odd, perhaps, but resourceful. Archaeological evidence of pillowcases is scarce, but depictions in manuscripts show embroidered cloth, sometimes with initials or religious symbols stitched at the corners. For nobles, even the act of sleep was an opportunity to display status. A knight might rest his head not only on herbs but on linen marked with his family crest, a nightly reminder of identity. Researchers debate how common such herbal pillows were among knights of middling wealth. Some argue they were widespread, as herbs grew abundantly in castle gardens. Others suggest that elaborate mixtures were reserved for the wealthy, while poorer retainers used plain straw bolsters. The uncertainty leaves you wondering, tonight, would your head rest on fragrant herbs or scratchy stalks? As you sink into the imagined pillow, the effect becomes clear. The air near your face is softer, carrying not just warmth but a memory of summer fields. Inhaling deeply, you almost forget the stone walls pressing close, the drafts creeping under curtains. The scent anchors you somewhere else, perhaps a meadow, perhaps a garden. For a moment, the coldest night in the castle transforms into a dream of warmth. There's an anecdote worth smiling at. One knight, travelling with his household, complained bitterly when servants forgot to pack his pillow sachet. He declared he could not sleep without the rosemary scent, claiming it kept away evil airs. His grumbling was recorded with a touch of mockery, but it shows just how much faith people put into these little comforts. Imagine a hardened warrior sulking like a child over the absence of perfumed stuffing. You roll onto your side, cheek pressed against the imagined herbs, and feel the strangeness of medieval medicine blending with nightly routine. The pillow is not simply support, it's a charm, a talisman against illness, a key to gentle dreams. Faith and practicality merge in its fabric, turning ordinary sleep into ritual. What may surprise you is how often such sachets doubled as insect repellents. Strong herbs like mint or wormwood helped keep lice and fleas at bay. In an age when vermin were constant companions, the scented pillow offered both fragrance and protection. Every breath you take tonight carries not only calm, but also relief from crawling nuisances. Close your eyes now and picture the scene fully. The curtained bed enclosing you, the fire's glow reduced to embers, the wind still moaning in corridors beyond. Yet at your head, there is sweetness. Lavender, rosemary, maybe a hint of rose-fragile, fleeting scents, but powerful enough to soften the harshness of stone and frost. The herbal pillow is a reminder that even in a world of iron and hardship, people sought gentleness where they could. And perhaps that is the heart of medieval sleep. Beneath the weight of furs, beside the glow of a brazier, under the watch of guards, there was still room for small comforts, flowers dried and sewn into linen, breathing peace into the coldest night. The fragrance of lavender and rosemary lingers faintly in your imagined pillow, lulling you toward rest. But just as your eyes flutter closed, a sound rises in the distance, deep, resonant, and impossible to ignore. The church bell. Its voice pierces through the cold night, echoing across fields, woods, and frozen moats, carrying into every chamber of the castle. Time itself was measured in these notes, and even in sleep, nights lived by their rhythm. Monastic influence made bells central to medieval life. They marked the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, and though laymen weren't bound to follow the strict rhythm of monks, the sounds still shaped their nights. Imagine lying in bed, half warmed by furs, when the bell tolls at midnight for matins. Its low vibration seems to shake the stone itself. For some, it was a reminder to whisper prayers. For others, merely a disruption, a sign that the cold hours still stretched ahead. One detail frequently noted in chronicles is how far bells carried in winter. With leaves off the trees and air crisp, the sound travelled farther, bouncing across frozen landscapes. A knight lying under pelts might hear not only his own chapel bell but others from villages miles away, layering the night with overlapping tones. The sound became a chorus, distant yet insistent, reminding you that the world beyond the castle walls still moved. What may surprise you is how bells weren't only markers of prayer. They also served as alarms. A sudden peal at an odd hour could signal fire, attack, or danger. Imagine being jolted awake, heart racing, as the familiar slow rhythm turned urgent. Your body, still heavy with sleep, would lurch toward armor and sword, the cold forgotten in panic. The very instrument that lulled you could also summon you to battle. There's an unusual anecdote from an English manor. A guest complained that the bells rang so frequently he felt as though no hour of rest was granted by heaven. Whether exaggeration or truth, it shows how disruptive the rhythm could feel to those unused to it. Sleep was always interrupted, nudged into patterns shaped by faith and duty rather than personal desire. Researchers today debate the effect of these bells on daily life. Some argue that medieval people were so accustomed to the sound that they hardly noticed, drifting back to sleep easily. Others suggest that the bells fractured rest, creating a pattern of segmented sleep periods of waking and dozing that aligned with prayer times. The discussion continues, leaving us to imagine how a night's dreams wove around those deep metallic notes. As you lie in your chamber now, you can almost feel the bell vibrating in your chest. The sound slides through stone corridors, through shuttered windows, through curtained beds. It is inescapable, yet it is also strangely calming. The cold, the drafts, the creaks of timber, these are random, unsettling, but the bell is steady, intentional, a voice that orders the night. You know where you are in time because of it, and in a world without clocks, that knowledge mattered. What might amuse you is the variety of reactions people had to bells. Some knights grumbled, pulling blankets higher over their heads. Others insisted on rising, muttering psalms before collapsing back into sleep. And a few, perhaps overly pious or overly anxious, stayed awake entirely, convinced missing a prayer might doom them. Picture your fellow knight glaring at you groggily in the morning while insisting he kept vigil all night. You suspect he merely dozed sitting up, his head bobbing like a rooster. There's also the aesthetic pleasure of it. Imagine the sound cutting through a still winter night, each strike of the clapper echoing against snowy fields, softened and lengthened by the air. For a moment, the cold seems less hostile, the darkness less endless. The bell becomes a reminder that others are awake, others are praying, and you are part of a larger rhythm. Close your eyes and picture the sequence. The deep boom, then silent stretching, then another. The spaces between are as important as the sound itself. In those gaps, your heartbeat slows, your breath steadies. The bell has interrupted your sleep, yes, but it has also guided you back into it, rocking you in its rhythm. By the time silence returns, the chamber feels heavier, softer. The echoes fade into stone, leaving only the sigh of wind and the crackle of embers. You roll back into your furs, pulling them up to your chin, and let the lingering vibration of the bell settle into your bones. In the coldest of nights, it is not only warmth that carries you through, it is rhythm, sound, and the sense that time still moves, even when you cannot see the stars. And so you drift again, half aware of the bell's echo still singing across the countryside, binding castle, village, and forest together under the same frozen sky. The echo of the bell still hums in your chest, but as silence returns, another unease creeps into the chamber. It is not the draught, not the weight of pelts, not even the restless wind. It is the ancient suspicion that the night air itself could harm you. In the medieval world, darkness wasn't simply absence of light, it was thought to harbour dangers invisible. Spirits and sickness carried on the chill. You pull your blankets closer, not only against frost, but against superstition. Medical theory of the Middle Ages leaned heavily on the concept of bad airs or miasmas. Physicians warned that cold draughts brought illness, that sleeping in open air left one vulnerable to fevers or worse. The reasoning seems quaint now, yet in chambers where people regularly woke with coughs, the belief felt justified. Imagine lying in bed, hearing the hiss of wind through a shutter, and worrying not just about discomfort but about disease riding in on that invisible stream. One recorded detail from household regulations shows how seriously people took this. Servants were instructed to block cracks with cloth at night, not only to keep warmth, but to prevent night vapors from entering. Curtains around the bed were praised not only for trapping heat, but for shielding sleepers from these unseen dangers. Your cocoon of fabric was as much a fortress against imagined spirits as against draughts. What may surprise you is how often this fear blended with folklore. People spoke of night walkers, spirits or demons carried on the wind, slipping into rooms through cracks or chimneys. Whispered tales told of souls smothered in their sleep, victims of foul air or ghostly presence. You can almost hear the servants muttering about such things as they pulled curtains tight, each knot in the fabric a ward against the unseen. There's a curious anecdote from a 14th century chronicle. A knight, convinced that evil spirits caused his recurring cough, ordered his bed relocated from the outer wall to the centre of the chamber. He believed the draughts carried malice, and that by moving inward, he would be shielded. Whether his health improved or not is left unsaid, but the image of a bed dragged clumsily across stone each evening is almost comical. Archaeologists studying castle layouts have found signs that some chambers were indeed rearranged. Seasonally beds shifted, curtains adjusted, fires repositioned. Was it purely for warmth, or also to escape the imagined threat of harmful air? Scholars still discuss it. Some emphasize practical survival, while others point to the persistence of folklore as proof that superstition shaped even domestic design. And yet, if you lie here tonight, you begin to understand. The wind moans through stone like a living thing, rattling shutters, breathing across your cheeks. In the silence of night, it feels less like weather and more like presence. You might laugh at the idea of spirits, but your body still tenses, your hand still clutches the blanket. Fear is powerful when darkness presses close. What might amuse you is the odd remedies people tried. Some kept garlic or onions in their chambers, believing strong odors repelled bad airs. Others burned herbs, filling the room with smoke to counter invisible threats. Imagine drifting to sleep with both lavender and garlic, battling in the air, a mixture hardly soothing, but meant to protect. The medieval bedroom was not only a place of rest, but also of fumigation. The night deepens. You feel your breath warming the pocket of air within your curtains. Outside, the wind roams freely, carrying with it all the fears of your age. But inside, you are shielded. Furs, curtains, herbs, even prayers form a barrier. Whether or not the dangers were real hardly mattered. The rituals convinced you they were kept at bay. Researchers suggest that these beliefs shaped behavior even after daylight returned. People avoided sleeping near open windows, covered their mouths when drafts passed, and kept amulets at their bedsides. Sleep was never a matter of lying down casually. It was a negotiation with forces visible and invisible. In a castle, surrounded by stone and superstition, every night was a kind of truce. Close your eyes again and feel it. The cold pressing at the curtains, the breath of wind on the other side of the wall, the faint crackle of herbs smouldering in the brazier. You are safe, or at least you believe you are, and that belief is enough. In the Middle Ages, faith and superstition worked hand in hand to guard the sleeper. Tonight, they guard you. You drift back toward dreams, not entirely convinced the night air is harmless, but comforted by the weight of tradition. Every tied curtain, every whispered blessing, every pouch of herbs assures you that the darkness cannot touch you. Whether true or not, you surrender to the illusion, and sometimes, illusion is what sleep requires. The fear of night air lingers in your mind, yet sleep is shaped not only by superstition but by rhythm, the larger pattern of castle life that pulses around you. A night's rest was rarely steady or predictable. Instead, it rose and fell with feasts, hunts, campaigns, and duties. The coldest nights often carried with them exhaustion not from the weather alone, but from the endless demands of the day. Chronicles describe how castles came alive after sunset with banquets. Fires blazed in the great hall, goblets clinked, laughter rolled, and music swelled. Knights feasted heartily, filling their bellies with roasted meat, bread, and ale. Yet once the revelry ended, they stumbled back to their chambers, heavy with food and drink, sometimes too full to rest easily. Imagine lying under pelts, your stomach groaning from venison and wine, while the draughts gnawed at your toes. Comfort was elusive not from hunger, but from excess. One well-documented detail shows that feasts disrupted sleep schedules entirely. Guests often lingered past midnight, telling stories or playing games. By the time they retired, the bells of matins might already toll. In such cases, sleep came late and short, broken into fragments. A knight's chamber was less a sanctuary than a pit stop between one duty and the next. What may surprise you is how hunts also influenced nightly rest. Hunts often began before dawn, so men rose in the freezing dark, stumbling out of beds while servants fumbled with torches. The excitement of the chase sometimes outweighed the discomfort, but the result was the same: truncated sleep, taken in odd hours. A knight might nap at midday in armor, then endure the cold of the night half dreaming, muscles still buzzing from the chase. Campaigns, of course, disrupted everything. Letters and military accounts tell us that during war, sleep was scattered in bursts, an hour by the fire, another against a shield, sometimes none at all. Returning to a castle meant luxury only by comparison. Even a draughty solar, Even a lumpy mattress felt like paradise compared to a frozen ditch. You can almost feel the relief of pulling pelts over yourself, whispering, "At least this isn't the battlefield." And here lies a point debated among historians. Did medieval people expect segmented sleep as normal? Some suggest they routinely slept in two phases, one before midnight, then another after a period of wakefulness filled with prayer, reading, or even conversation. Others argue this pattern was more common in towns than in castles, where duties and alarms disrupted any rhythm. The answer remains uncertain, but the idea of first sleep and second sleep lingers as a window into how flexible rest once was. There's a quirky anecdote from a 15th century castle. One knight, after feasting too heavily, spent his midnight wakefulness composing verses about the cold. His companions teased him for writing poetry while wrapped in blankets, but he defended it, claiming the chill sharpened his mind. Picture him, quill in hand, muttering lines about icy draughts while everyone else groaned to be left alone. As you lie in your chamber tonight, you feel these rhythms pressing around you. Perhaps yesterday was a feast, and your belly aches. Perhaps tomorrow is a hunt, and you will rise before the stars fade. Or perhaps war looms, and the thought of interrupted sleep already clouds your dreams. Whatever the case, your rest is never purely your own. It bends to the larger life of the castle. What might amuse you is the contrast. Peasants outside the walls, with far simpler lives, may have slept more steadily than knights, precisely because they lacked feasts and alarms. They went to bed with the sun, rose with the dawn, and rarely heard bells in the night. For all their hardship, their rhythm may have been gentler than that of lords. In some ways, privilege meant more disruption. The chamber around you reflects that reality. Your curtains, your pelts, your scented pillow, these give comfort. But your body still carries the feasting, the hunting, the duties of the day. Even here you are restless, turning under covers as memory and expectation tug at you. The cold is only one part of the struggle. The life itself, with its irregular cadence, shapes your sleep far more deeply. Close your eyes and let yourself drift through that rhythm. You feel echoes of laughter still buzzing from the hall. Hear the imagined bark of hounds awaiting the morning hunt. Sense the faint tension of a campaign that might call you from bed at any moment. Sleep is not steady, but it comes anyway, pulled down by exhaustion, nudged back by noise, broken and resumed. In the end, you realize that medieval sleep was not a straight line, but a patchwork stitched together by duty, disrupted by bells, seasoned with feasts, and softened by ritual. It was less about long hours of peace, and more about finding rest wherever and whenever life allowed. And so tonight, as you sink once more into your cocoon of warmth, you surrender not to perfect sleep, but to sleep as it truly was, uneven, fragile, but still enough to carry you into dawn. Your dreams flutter in fragments, carried by the rhythm of bells and feasts, when a harsher sound interrupts the cough of someone nearby. In a medieval castle, that cough was more than an annoyance. It was a warning. On the coldest nights, sickness lingered in the air like an unseen enemy, waiting to strike when bodies were weakest. Wrapped in furs, you draw them tighter, suddenly aware that warmth was not only about comfort, but about survival against disease. Medical texts from the Middle Ages are filled with references to winter humours. Physicians believed that cold and damp provoked imbalance in the body, leading to fevers, chills, or lingering coughs. A knight could face swords bravely by day, but at night he feared something less visible, illness creeping into his chest, robbing him of breath. The association was so strong that chroniclers often described castles in winter echoing with the chorus of coughing, as if the walls themselves were sick. One well-recorded fact is that fires, while offering warmth, also filled chambers with smoke. Combined with draughts and dampness, the air often irritated throats and lungs. Imagine lying under pelts, your eyes stinging, your chest tightening, wondering whether the cough you heard across the chamber was just smoke or the beginning of something worse. What may surprise you is the remedies people attempted. Herbal teas brewed from thyme, honey, or horehound were common. Some slept with onions near their beds, believing they absorbed bad vapors. Others clutched charms blessed by priests, hoping divine aid would keep illness away. Imagine drifting to sleep with a raw onion on your nightstand and a saint's medal under your pillow. Strange perhaps, but in their world, no precaution was too odd. A curious anecdote survives from a 14th century castle. A knight, convinced he had caught a deadly chill, ordered his squires to pile every available blanket onto him. They obeyed, layering so many covers that he could barely move. The next morning, drenched in sweat, he declared himself cured. Whether by coincidence or genuine fever broken, he became known among his household as the Bundle Knight. Picture him waddling from bed, groaning under a mountain of wool, yet smug in his victory over winter. Scholars today still debate the extent to which cold truly caused illness versus merely worsened its perception. Some argue that the damp conditions of castles, poor ventilation, close quarters, unwashed bedding, spread contagion far more than temperature itself. Others emphasize how constant exposure to cold weakened immune systems. Either way, the fear was real. Every sneeze in the night sent a ripple of unease through a chamber. You can almost hear it now. A cough echoes faintly down the corridor. Another follows. The sound punctures the silence more sharply than the wind itself. Wrapped in your cocoon, you pull the pelts higher, trying to convince yourself the air within is pure, protected by herbs and prayers. Yet unease lingers. Sleep feels dangerous when sickness prowls just beyond the curtains. What might amuse you is how even alcohol was treated as medicine against winter ills. Physicians recommended warm-spiced wine or ale to drive out cold humors. Knights gladly followed this advice, sipping heavily before bed under the guise of health. Imagine the slurred prayers, the snores louder than any cough, the belief that drunken warmth equaled immunity. It wasn't effective, but it was comforting, and in their world, comfort often mattered more than cure. The castle itself echoed with these nightly struggles. Servants passed cups of broth to fevered retainers, while nobles whispered anxious prayers over sick children. Death from chills, pneumonia, or plague was never far away. Sleep wasn't simply a chance to rest. It was a gamble with fate. Each night you woke alive felt like triumph. Close your eyes and lean into that thought. The cold presses still. The coughs continue faintly, but you breathe deeply of your herb-scented pillow and the pelts above you. You remind yourself of every layer: fabric, fire, prayer meant to shield you. Perhaps the night beside you snores instead of coughing. Perhaps tomorrow's dawn will bring only frost, not fever. And in that fragile hope lies your comfort. For medieval sleepers, the coldest nights always carried a shadow of illness. But faith, ritual, and sheer endurance kept them pressing on. Tonight, you too surrender to that uneasy truce, drifting into slumber while illness lurks at the edges of your dreams. The memory of coughs fades as your mind slips back into uneasy dreams. Yet even in sleep, your thoughts wander far beyond the frozen walls of the castle. You imagine heat, light, and sand visions of lands you may never see again. For many nights, the coldest nights in northern fortresses conjured up dreams of Crusades, of deserts where the sun burned so fiercely that frost felt impossible. In the stillness of your chamber, your mind drifts toward those distant journeys. Contemporary chronicles reveal how strongly the memory of foreign campaigns lingered. Men who had marched in the Levant spoke often of nights spent beneath star-filled skies, the air warm enough that a simple cloak sufficed. Back in Europe, wrapped in furs and shivering under pelts, they dreamed of that heat. Imagine lying in your curtained bed, frost creeping on the shutters, while your mind replays the taste of dates, the scent of spice markets, the blaze of desert noon. Cold makes you crave the opposite, and in sleep, the body often grants that longing. One well-documented account describes a crusader returned to Burgundy, who claimed he could never again feel warm. He said that in Jerusalem he had baked in armor until his skin blistered, but once back home, no fire seemed to reach his bones. Whether exaggeration or truth, it captures the paradox. Exposure to extremes etched themselves into memory, reshaping even how one experienced sleep. What may surprise you is that these dreams were not always nostalgic. Some nights spoke of nightmares, visions of endless marching under scorching suns, the buzz of flies, the cries of the wounded. To wake in a freezing chamber with sweat on your brow was disorienting. Your body chilled, yet your mind trapped in heat. The contrast between waking and dreaming made the night feel uncanny, as though time and space twisted together in the darkness. There's a curious anecdote from a 13th century chronicle. A knight in winter reportedly shouted in his sleep, begging for water, startling his companions. When they shook him awake, he laughed bitterly, saying he'd been back in the desert again. The image is striking, fur piled on his chest, frost at the window, yet his mind still burned. Archaeological evidence hints at these mental journeys too. Inscriptions left on castle walls by returned Crusaders include references to the Holy Land, carved crosses, or names of distant places. It suggests that even at home, their minds dwelled elsewhere. You can almost picture a weary man scratching acre into stone before crawling beneath pelts, as if naming the place might carry him back into dreams of warmth. Scholars today still discuss whether these recurring dreams represented trauma, longing, or simple contrast. Some frame them as evidence of early psychological scars, what we might now call haunting memories of war. Others argue they were cultural expressions, stories told to reinforce the prestige of Crusaders. Whatever the truth, the dreams themselves must have felt vivid and strange, slipping between heat and frost as sleep tugged the mind in unexpected directions. As you lie in your chamber now, you can feel the pull of those distant images. The crackling fire becomes desert Sunday. The scent of lavender in your pillow becomes spice and myrrh. The howling wind outside your shutter transforms into the murmur of foreign markets. For a moment, you are both here and there, frozen body, wandering mind. What might amuse you is how even those who never left home claimed such dreams. Tales spread through castles, and squires who had never seen a palm tree still imagined warm Crusader nights. Their minds borrowed the stories of older knights, stitching together visions of deserts and cities from hearsay. In dreams, experience was contagious. You turn beneath your blankets, caught between two worlds. Outside, the frost still grips the moat, the guards still stamp their feet, the shutters still rattle. But inside your mind, you ride across endless dunes, the sand shifting under your horse's hooves. You feel heat against your skin, hear the call to prayer rising in the distance, smell the salt of the Mediterranean. Dreams deliver you what waking life denies: warmth, light, and escape. And when you stir awake again, breath clouding in the cold air of your chamber, you realize the irony. Even in castles built to withstand armies, knights still fled by night, not in body, but in mind. The coldest winters pushed them to dream of deserts, trading frost for fire, if only for a few hours at a time. Close your eyes once more. The pelts are heavy, the air still sharp, but your thoughts wander again towards sun and sand. Perhaps that is the final gift of the coldest nights. They make every dream of warmth feel sweeter, every memory of heat feel more precious. Sleep carries you far from the castle walls, if only until the dawn. The desert dream fades, and slowly you drift back into the reality of stone walls and frost. As your mind steadies, you become aware of another presence outside the chamber: the moat. By day, it is a barrier against enemies. By night, in winter, it is a mirror of ice, gleaming faintly beneath the moon. Even in sleep, you imagine its surface frozen solid, the castle ringed not by water but by a silent sheet of glass. Accounts from chroniclers often mention how winter transformed castles. Moats, ponds, and wells stiffened into stillness, reflecting stars like silver mirrors. The sight must have been uncanny for residents, the familiar fortress suddenly encircled by a silent white plain. From your bed, Behind curtains, you can still picture it, the moat below stiff with ice, the drawbridge creaking against frost, guards peering down at their reflections on the hard surface. One detail well attested is that frozen moats sometimes threatened security. Ice gave enemies a bridge, turning water defenses into mere decoration. There are stories of raids launched under cover of snow, when attackers skated or crept across ice where once boats would have floundered. Imagine lying awake in your bed, aware that the very shield of your home now offered danger. The cold did not only chill, it changed the rules of defense. What may surprise you is how the frozen moat also altered the castle's soundscape. In thaw, water lapped gently against walls. In frost, silence reigned, broken only when ice cracked or shifted with booming echoes. Residents described hearing sudden, thunderous cracks in the night, startling them awake, unsure whether it was ice breaking or walls under attack. To lie in bed and hear that echo through stone must have been deeply unsettling. There's a curious anecdote from a 14th century siege. Defenders poured hot water down the sides of the moat to weaken ice, hoping to prevent enemies from crossing. The steam rose like mist in the freezing air, a ghostly sight. Imagine servants bustling in the dark, carrying buckets, the moat hissing angrily as hot and cold collided. In such moments, sleep was impossible. Survival demanded vigilance. Archaeological studies of castle sites near rivers reveal sediment layers suggesting repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Such evidence confirms that icy moats weren't rare, they were seasonal certainties. Knights within would have known each year that their watery guardian would turn traitor come winter, and so their sleep, wrapped in furs, was shadowed by this awareness. The moat outside no longer protected them fully. Scholars continue to discuss how residents psychologically adapted to such shifts. Some argue the sight of frozen moats heightened anxiety, disrupting rest. Others suggest that once accepted, the ice became part of the seasonal rhythm, a background fact of life like drafts and coughs. The uncertainty leaves room for imagination. You, lying in your chamber, might either dread the ice or marvel at its beauty, depending on temperament. And there was beauty. On clear nights, when moonlight struck the frozen surface, the moat glittered like crystal. Residents described the eerie loveliness of stars mirrored beneath the walls. From your bed, if the curtains parted, you could glimpse faint silver light bouncing upward, softening the darkness. The same ice that threatened also dazzled. Cold was cruel, but it could also enchant. What might amuse you is the thought of boys sneaking out to slide across the frozen moat. Chronicles hint at such antics, with reprimands recorded for reckless squires. You can imagine their laughter echoing in the night, boots skidding across slick surfaces, while their masters shivered in bed above, cursing the draught. Mischief thrived even in frost. Now, as you lie back, you let your mind drift toward that frozen circle outside. The moat is silent, the horses in the stables quiet, the world stilled under ice. Inside, you are swaddled in layers. Outside, the earth itself is locked in glass. The contrast is striking. Your warmth, however fragile, against the cold perfection of frozen water. Close your eyes and feel the strangeness of it. A castle is supposed to be eternal, unchanging, yet each season reshaped it. In winter, the moat is not water but mirror, not barrier but bridge. Your sleep is not isolated from this change. It carries into your dreams, mixing unease and wonder. And so you drift again, half imagining the crack of shifting ice, half enchanted by the glow of moonlight on a frozen moat. The castle is ringed by silence, and within that silence, you find yourself pulled back toward rest. The moat outside lies frozen and silent, but within the walls another sound begins to rise, a chorus, not of bells or draughts, but of human voices. In the great hall below, songs drift upward, softened by distance yet persistent enough to reach your chamber. Feasting might have ended, but merriment often carried late into the night. Even on the coldest evenings, music and stories offered warmth no fire could provide. Contemporary descriptions tell us that after supper, minstrels often entertained the household. They plucked lutes, strummed harps, or blew on pipes, while singers wove tales of heroes and saints. For knights, these performances weren't simply diversion, they were instruction, reminders of courage, loyalty, and virtue. Imagine lying beneath your pelts, half asleep, while a ballad of Charlemagne echoes faintly, the melody threading through stone corridors. The castle itself becomes an instrument, carrying notes across floors and chambers. One fact frequently mentioned in records is how song and storytelling often lasted deep into the night. Guests sprawled on benches, servants dozed against walls, and lords called for encore after encore. The warmth of wine fueled both performers and listeners. By the time the hall emptied, midnight bells might already toll. Those who had to rise early for hunts or watches cursed under their breath, while others cherished the rare escape from winter gloom. What may surprise you is how much of this sound seeped into private chambers. Stone walls amplified echoes, and even a curtained bed couldn't block the muffled rhythm of drum or chant. Sleep was shaped not only by drafts but by entertainment. You might dream of battles not because you fought them, but because a minstrel sang of them an hour before you closed your eyes. There's an unusual anecdote from a northern chronicle. One knight complained that a bard's endless verses about Alexander the Great kept him awake for 3 straight nights. He begged his lord to silence the man, only to be mocked for lacking stamina. Picture him tossing beneath his blankets, groaning at each new stanza, muttering that he'd rather face frost than poetry. Archaeological finds give us glimpses of the instruments themselves. Fragments of harps, whistles carved from bone, drums with stretched hide. Their tones must have been raw, piercing through smoky air. Imagine the vibration of a drum thudding in your chest even as you tried to sleep, or the plaintive song of a flute weaving itself into your half-dreams. Scholars still discuss whether music at night eased rest or disturbed it. Some argue it soothed the household, much like lullabies for children. Others believe it fractured sleep, keeping bodies restless long after fires burned low. Perhaps both are true. For some, song was comfort. For others, torture. Tonight, in your chamber, the faint strains feel more calming than disruptive, a reminder that warmth exists beyond your pelts, carried in human voice. What might amuse you is how knights themselves sometimes joined in, despite the stiffness of armor and the seriousness of their reputation. Imagine a burly man, red-nosed from drink, leaning into song with a voice cracked and off-key, while his companions cheered anyway. Such moments broke the severity of life, proving even warriors needed music to survive long winters. As you roll under your covers, the muffled notes become distant, fading into a lull. The rhythm of the harp blends with the crack of embers. The echo of voices dissolves into wind. In that merging, you feel something profound. The castle itself is alive with sound, and even in your private chamber, you are part of the collective heartbeat. Close your eyes and let the echoes wash over you. The frozen moat may threaten, the drafts may bite, but tonight the fortress hums with stories. You sleep not in silence, but in a choir of memory, songs of saints, heroes and fools sung to fill the void of winter. And in that music, softened by distance, you finally slip toward deeper slumber, knowing that even the coldest night could be warmed by voices that refuse to fall quiet. The songs from the great hall fade at last, replaced by the quieter sounds of night footsteps retreating, benches scraping, torches hissing as they burn low. Yet not everyone in the castle has the luxury of sleep. Somewhere above you, faint thuds and rustles reveal the unseen figures who keep watch against fire. On the coldest nights, when hearths and braziers blazed hotter than usual, the danger of flames spreading through rushes and timber beams was constant. Fire kept you alive, but fire could also destroy you. Historical ordinances from noble households mention explicit roles. Servants called watchmen of the fire patrolled halls after others had retired. Their duty was simple but vital. Stir the embers, but never let them flare out of control. A single spark on dry rushes could transform a chamber into an inferno. Imagine their tired eyes scanning the floor, hands clutching buckets of sand, ears pricked for the faint crackle that might signal disaster. While you curled under pelts, they fought a quieter battle against accident. One well-documented fact is that many castles banned open flames in private rooms without supervision. Candles were precious, but also risky. Residents often snuffed them before pulling curtains shut, leaving only the glow of a guarded brazier. Picture yourself lying in near darkness, the faint orange shimmer of coals your only companion, knowing that if a servant forgot his duty, you might wake surrounded by smoke. What may surprise you is how frequently fires still broke out despite precautions. Chronicles describe great halls gutted, roofs collapsing in sparks, even entire fortresses ruined. Survivors often spoke of waking to shouts and choking fumes, stumbling through smoke-choked corridors. Sleep in castles carried this latent anxiety, safety from swords, yet not from flame. There's a curious anecdote from a 15th century account. A knight, half drunk from feast, kicked over a candle as he fumbled toward his bed. His chamber nearly ignited, and only quick-thinking servants who doused the rushes saved him. The next day he swore never to drink after dusk again, though. Predictably, he broke that vow within the week. Such stories remind you how thin the line between warmth and disaster truly was. Archaeological studies of charred beams found in castle ruins confirm this ever-present hazard. Even stone fortresses depended on wooden floors, ceilings, and roofs. Fire was both comfort and curse, survival and threat. To lie in bed under heavy covers, knowing servants padded the halls with water pails, was to acknowledge that your rest was bought with vigilance. Scholars today debate how common dedicated fire watchers were. Some suggest only the wealthiest castles employed them nightly, while smaller households relied on sleepy squires or overworked servants to keep embers safe. Others argue it was universal because the risk was too great to ignore. The discussion remains open, but one thing is clear: the fear of fire shaped how people slept. As you lie beneath your pelts, you imagine those unseen figures walking softly outside your chamber. You hear the faint scrape of a poker against logs, the shuffle of boots on rushes, the low mutter of a servant scolding himself awake. Their presence is invisible yet essential. Your dreams depend on their alertness. What might amuse you is how some households used bells not only for prayers, but also as alarms for fire. A small handbell rung in corridors could rouse drowsy watchmen or wake dozing squires. Picture the absurdity: a servant creeping through stone passages, ringing a bell softly just to make sure another servant didn't nod off beside the brazier. Even discipline had its comic edge. Close your eyes now and sense the tension. Warmth cradles you, but fear hums faintly. The brazier glows, the fire watchers pace. The castle breathes with cautious vigilance. Sleep is possible only because others remain half awake, scanning for sparks. And so you drift once more, lulled by the knowledge that the danger of flame has been given to other hands. On the coldest nights, when fires burned brightest, safety rested not only in walls and weapons, but in servants who guarded your slumber from the very element meant to save you. The quiet tread of the fire watch fades, leaving only the faint glow of embers in your chamber. You sigh into your furs, feeling warmth close about you, but your thoughts linger on another truth. Not every bed in the castle was equal. As you rest in your curtained cocoon, others lie on pallets, benches, or even bare floors. Hierarchy did not vanish at night. It shaped every layer of rest, dividing warmth from cold, softness from hardness. Documents from noble households often list bedding among prized possessions: feather mattresses, wool blankets, fur covers. Such luxuries cascaded downward in rank. Lords claimed the finest goose down, knights accepted wool or straw bolsters, and servants managed with straw sacks. Imagine the contrast: you turning under embroidered covers while a stable boy slept nearby on hay that crackled each time he shifted. The castle united all under one roof, but within that roof, sleep was tiered like the feasts in the great hall. One well-recorded fact is that feather mattresses were so valuable they appeared in wills. Inheritance of bedding symbolized comfort as much as wealth. To own a feather bed was to possess not just a place to lie, but status itself. Picture a noble lady passing her best bed to a daughter, ensuring nights wrapped in softness. Compare that to a servant inheriting nothing more than a worn cloak, to be folded into makeshift bedding on cold stone. What may surprise you is how even the placement of beds marked hierarchy. Nobles slept high in solas or upper chambers, closer to heat rising from halls below. Servants and guards were consigned to lower, damper floors, where frost seeped more fiercely. To lie beneath pelts on an upper floor was to feel warmth multiplied by privilege. Down below, someone else's breath smoked in the freezing dark. There's a curious anecdote in a 15th century household account. A knight discovered his page had snuck under his own covers during the night, seeking warmth. Rather than punishing him, he laughed and let the boy stay, remarking that rank matters less than frost. The story survives because it was unusual. Most would not have crossed such lines. But the image of hierarchy bending, however briefly, reveals how cold nights sometimes dissolved even rigid order. Archaeological digs of castle remains uncover traces of straw bedding scattered in corners far from hearths. These were likely the spots where servants slept out of sight, out of mind. The straw insulated poorly, offering scratchy rest at best. Fleas thrived in it, adding itch to chill. To compare such rest with your curtained bed is to glimpse the sharp divide of medieval life. Some endured winter with dignity, others with nothing but stubbornness. Scholars continue to discuss whether knights themselves often endured straw mattresses or whether furs elevated their rest enough to make nights bearable. Some argue even mid-ranking men suffered discomfort far greater than romantic tales suggest. Others insist that for those sworn to arms, modest beds were normal, their bodies too tired to notice hardness. The truth, likely, varied luxury or austerity depending on wealth and circumstance. You lie still, imagining the many sleepers scattered throughout the fortress tonight. In solas, lords breathe softly under feather and fur. In shared chambers, knights curl against draughts, hoping pelts suffice. In servants' corners, boys shiver on straw, cloaks pulled to their noses. All dream beneath the same roof, but each roof is different depending on station. What might amuse you is how even dreams were thought to follow hierarchy. Noble dream books interpreted visions of crowns or jewels as omens, while servants' dreams of food were dismissed as hunger. The night did not erase rank, it reaffirmed it in subtle ways, even in imagination. To be cold on straw meant dreaming of bread. To be warm on feather meant dreaming of glory. And yet, when frost was sharpest, these lines sometimes blurred. A lord, restless despite his feather bed, might envy the camaraderie of squires packed together like puppies. A servant, exhausted on straw, might envy the stillness of his master's curtained cocoon. Sleep, in its simplicity, revealed desires that rank could not fully control. Close your eyes again and see the castle as a hive of sleepers. Each chamber glows faintly with ember or candle, each bed a world of its own. Above, below, side by side, people lie breathing into the same winter air, bound together by walls yet separated by wealth. And you privileged with pelts, curtains, and scented pillows cannot help but think of them as you sink deeper into rest. For in the end, medieval sleep was not just about cold or warmth, but about inequality. The coldest nights made the differences sharper. Some suffered, some endured, some indulged. And tonight, you feel both gratitude and guilt as you surrender to slumber, aware that others under the same roof will wake with aching bones and frozen fingers. The castle breathes around you, some curled in feather beds, others shivering on straw. But even among knights themselves, the night was not uniform. Your own rest, wrapped in furs and scented linen, was shaped not only by rank, but by who you were. A man, a warrior. Yet in the chamber beside yours, a lady of the household prepared for sleep in her own way. Gender, too, determined the rhythms of slumber. Contemporary sources reveal differences between how men and women experienced the coldest nights. Noble women often had their own solas, chambers hung with finer fabrics, guarded by attendants. Their bedding could be lavish embroidered covers, delicate linens, perfumed sachets stronger than any knight's. But alongside luxury came restrictions. Women were rarely left entirely alone. Servants or companions often shared their chambers, both for warmth and propriety. Imagine trying to drift into dreams while knowing a maid rustled in the corner, always watching. One well-documented fact is that childbirth, illness, and nursing shaped female sleep in ways knights rarely considered. A lady might rise in the night to tend to children, or remain half-wakeful listening for their cries. In inventories, cradles appear alongside beds, evidence that the nursery was not separate but often inside the chamber itself. While a knight fretted over drafts and armor, a woman worried about the tiny body beside her, fragile against the winter chill. What may surprise you is that some noble women were said to burn night lamps more frequently than men, leaving chambers faintly lit through darkness. This wasn't only for comfort, it was for safety. Flames kept away vermin, soothed children, and reassured attendants. Yet they also heightened the risk of fire, a paradox accepted for peace of mind. Picture a lady lying beneath her silks, watching the glow of a lamp flicker against a tapestry while frost crept outside. There's a curious anecdote from a 15th century account. A noblewoman reportedly ordered her servants to warm not only her bed, but also her small lapdog's cushion, insisting the animal needed protection from drafts. The image is almost tender, a pampered dog snoring softly while servants scurried to keep it cozy, all while peasants outside battled frost with rags. Sleep, in this sense, became a theatre of privilege and affection. Archaeological studies of textile fragments suggest women's bedding was more varied in fabric. Silk, velvet, and dyed wool appear disproportionately in female chambers, compared to plainer woolen or leather furnishings in male ones. Even in slumber, identity was performed your station, your gender, your dignity woven into every coverlet. Scholars debate how much more comfortable women truly were. Some argue their solas, more carefully arranged and richly decorated, gave them better sleep. Others counter that constant obligations, childbearing, domestic oversight, religious devotions made women's nights shorter and more restless. The truth, likely, was complex. Comfort in fabric did not always equal comfort in body. As you imagine it now, the castle divides itself. In your chamber, the scent of rosemary mingles with smoke. In hers, the air is touched with rosewater, softer but no less cold. Your worries are of drafts, armor, and dreams of crusades. Hers are of children, propriety, and household order. Both of you lie awake at moments, listening to wind batter the shutters, bound by the same cold yet shaped by different roles. What might amuse you is that some women wrote about the antics of their husbands at night, snoring so loudly that curtains shook, or stealing covers in their sleep. Their complaints survive in letters, tiny glimpses of domestic frustration. In those words, you hear laughter too, proof that even in the stiff hierarchy of a castle, nighttime remained deeply human, full of petty quarrels beneath embroidered sheets. You close your eyes and think of these parallel lives. The castle is a hive of sleepers, yes, but not all share the same burdens. Knights rise at dawn for hunts or battles. Women rise for children, prayers, and endless duties. Both seek warmth in pelts and herbs, but each dreams differently. And as you drift towards sleep again, you realize that medieval knights were as divided by gender as by rank, yet linked by the same frost, the same need for rest. In the end, the cold cared nothing for these divisions. It pressed through stone, through silk, through fur, touching everyone equally. Yet how you faced it, how you softened it, revealed who you were in the order of the castle. And tonight, lying warm in your cocoon, you sense those other chambers near and far, each with its own story of survival through the longest, coldest hours. The thought of parallel chambers, lords in solars, ladies under silk, servants on straw draws your mind to yet another truth of castle life. No one truly slept in silence. Beyond the sounds of wind and footsteps, the fortress was alive with animals. Horses in the stables stamped and whickered, dogs barked or growled, chickens rustled in coops, and even pigs grunted in pens nearby. A medieval night never fully escaped the chorus of beasts, not even in the deepest night. Chroniclers describe castles as bustling ecosystems. The great hall often doubled as kennel, with hounds sprawled near the fire. Stables lay close to walls, so the warmth of horses radiated faintly into adjacent chambers. Cats prowled freely, hunting mice in storerooms. Imagine lying beneath pelts while faint neighs, barks, and scratches formed an odd lullaby through the stone. The line between human rest and animal presence blurred constantly. One fact frequently mentioned is that dogs in particular shared intimate space with knights. Hunting hounds were treasured, sometimes allowed to curl at the foot of beds. They offered warmth, companionship, and protection. Picture a knight drifting into dreams while his greyhound's body pressed against his legs, both of them sighing into the same warmth. It wasn't merely indulgence, it was practical, for dogs alerted masters to intruders or fires. What may surprise you is that birds sometimes roosted within chambers as well. Falcons, symbols of nobility, were kept indoors during training. Chronicles tell of falcons perched on stands beside beds, their feathers rustling in the dark. The idea of sleeping with a hunting bird just a few feet away seems strange now, but in the medieval world it was a mark of status. You can almost hear the faint shuffle of talons on wood as you turn under covers. A quirky anecdote comes from a 14th century French account. A knight's chamber was said to reek of horses because he insisted on keeping a prized stallion stabled directly beneath his solar, claiming he could sleep better when hearing it breathe. His guests complained, but he refused to change, declaring, "A man rests well with his steed near." The devotion borders on absurd, yet it highlights how inseparable knights were from their animals. Archaeological digs support this closeness. Remains of stables directly under or beside residential quarters show that warmth, smell, and sound from beasts seeped upward. In winter, this may have been a mixed blessing. The odor of manure might sting your nose, yet the faint heat of bodies below could help temper the frost. To lie in bed above a stable was to rest in a strange balance of comfort and disgust. Scholars continue to debate how disruptive these animal presences were. Some argue they comforted sleepers, providing warmth, security, and familiarity. Others suggest they disturbed rest endlessly with noise and smell. Perhaps the truth lies in habit. What modern sleepers would find unbearable became normal, even reassuring, to castle dwellers. As you lie in your chamber tonight, you can almost sense them. The thud of a hoof on wood, the rattle of a chain on a kennel, the flutter of wings from a restless falcon. These sounds weave into your dreams, mixing with the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind. You are never alone, not only because of servants and guards, but because animals breathe with you in the same fortress. What might amuse you is the thought of fleas and lice travelling freely between beasts and humans. Dogs in beds brought warmth, yes, but also vermin. Chronicles occasionally mention knights scratching furiously under furs, cursing their hounds even as they refused to banish them. Sleep was never entirely pure. It carried the company of creatures great and small. Close your eyes again and picture it. Outside, horses shift in stalls, steam rising from their bodies into the frozen air. Inside, dogs snore near the fire, their paws twitching in dreams of hunts. A falcon ruffles its feathers, tilting its head as if listening to the wind. All of them part of the same nightly rhythm, bound to the castle just as much as you. And so you drift, realizing that the coldest nights were endured not by humans alone but by entire communities of creatures. Together, knight and hound, squire and horse, lady and falcon all survived winter's grip. The castle was never just stone and men, it was a living ark, sheltering every heartbeat through the frost. The castle feels alive around you, dogs snoring near the fire, horses shifting in their stalls, servants shuffling in corridors, guards stamping their feet on the battlements. Yet as you sink deeper into the furs, you realize that every detail, the curtains, the herbs, the rushes, the fire, even the animals, serves one simple goal: to survive until morning. Medieval sleep was never effortless. It was a patchwork of warmth stolen from cold, order carved out of discomfort, and ritual laid like armor against the long night. Contemporary records reveal how much attention people gave to these fragile hours. Household roles listed bedding alongside weapons, proof that a good night's rest was as vital as a sharp sword. A knight who shivered all night would not fight well by day. Thus, every servant's task, every prayer whispered, every herb scattered was part of a greater system of survival. Imagine the household as a machine, each gear turning so that you, wrapped in pelts, might wake alive at dawn. One well-attested fact is that mornings often revealed frost clinging to bed curtains, even to blankets themselves. The air was so cold that your very breath crystallized. To wake in such conditions was a reminder that comfort in the night had only been temporary, a fragile bubble easily pierced. Picture yourself pushing aside heavy curtains to see your own breath hanging white in the morning light, your skin prickled with chill despite the furs. Sleep had been a reprieve, not a victory. What may surprise you is that some castles developed small routines to celebrate survival through the coldest nights. Chronicles describe lords rewarding servants with extra ale or bread if fires had been kept steadily. One record even mentions a morning cheer, a song sung by retainers as dawn broke after especially bitter nights. It was relief made ritual, gratitude that the household had endured together. A curious anecdote from a 14th century manuscript tells of a nobleman who claimed he slept best on the coldest nights because, as he put it, a man values warmth more when death breathes against the wall. His words are both dramatic and revealing. The very extremity of winter sharpened appreciation for every layer of fur, every spark of fire, every human or animal body pressed close. Comfort was born of contrast. Without the frost, the furs would have meant nothing. Archaeologists confirm that many adaptations left physical traces. Soot marks on stone show where braziers smoked year after year. Worn grooves in floors reveal where beds were dragged seasonally to warmer spots. Even faint imprints of textiles in soil hint at the presence of furs and curtains. The evidence shows not only how people lived but how they slept, their battle with cold etched into the very bones of castles. Scholars still discuss whether these measures truly succeeded in providing restful sleep. Some argue that the interruptions, bells, drafts, coughs, noises of animals must have left people perpetually weary. Others suggest that exhaustion from labor, training, or feasting ensured they slept regardless. The debate continues, but perhaps the truth is simple. Rest was never perfect, yet it was enough. The body adapts, the mind adjusts, and even in discomfort, people found ways to drift into dreams. As you lie in your chamber now, you feel the truth of this. Every layer around you is imperfect. Drafts creep through shutters, the brazier smokes faintly, a dog scratches at fleas, and the bell will ring again before dawn. Yet despite it all, your breath slows, your body loosens, and sleep comes. You are proof that survival is not about perfection, it is about acceptance. What might amuse you is how modern sleepers, wrapped in central heating and soft mattresses, might not endure a single night as you have. The very idea of frost on bed, curtains or fleas in furs would send them fleeing. Yet here you are, drifting into slumber with a strange satisfaction. Hardship has become normal, and normalcy has become comfort. Close your eyes one last time. The curtains around your bed hang heavy, muting the drafts. The herbal pillow releases its fading scent. the pelts press down, weighty but protective. Outside, guards pace and animals stir. The castle holds you, imperfect but steadfast. You surrender to it, body and mind, knowing that dawn will come with frost on the windows and a new day of duties. And as you drift, you realize the lesson hidden in these coldest nights, that sleep in a medieval castle was never simple, never guaranteed, but always precious. Every layer of warmth, every whispered prayer, every servant's step mattered. Rest was a communal triumph, shared by all who lived within stone walls. To sleep was to survive, and to survive was victory enough. Now the story slows, and so does your breath. You've journeyed through stone corridors and curtained chambers, felt the frost press at shutters, and heard the echoes of bells and dogs in the night. You've lain among furs, herbs, and prayers, surviving hour by hour in the coldest heart of winter. And now, at last, the tale itself draws its curtains closed. Let your body loosen as if laying aside armor. Imagine the pelts growing heavier, softer, pressing you deeper into the mattress. The drafts are far away now, only whispers fading at the edges of thought. The castle still breathes with watchmen, animals, and unseen hands, but you are no longer part of that bustle. You are at rest, shielded in your own cocoon. The air is still, the fire dimmed to embers. Each sound you once noticed has melted into quiet. Even the cold seems to retreat, replaced by warmth rising from within. Your breath drifts slow and even, a rhythm older than walls, older than stone. With each exhale, you release a little more of the day. With each inhale, you sink further into calm. Picture the frozen moat shining under moonlight, but let its lights soften and blur. The ice becomes glassy mist, the wind becomes a sigh, and the castle fades gently into dream. You are safe, you are warm, and you are carried forward by centuries of slumberers who close their eyes in the same way knights, squires, ladies, servants, all surrendering to sleep. Rest easy now. The story has ended. The night is yours. Drift deeper, and let the coldest castle night dissolve into your warmest dream.